Everybody. Hope you brought your snacks and your water bottles. We are going to be here a while today. Thank you, everybody that's hopping on today. I'm actually super excited about this. Got Timmy here, so
Hey, everyone.
got somebody else to talk to. You can put your computer up here. Obviously, you know why we're here, but just for those of you that might not, today we are going to go through corn and soybean programs, the way that agritech does it, but this isn't all just a agritech pitch, right? If you're already doing other stuff, if you're already using other systems and programs, this is still well worthwhile to be a part of, because we're going to walk through nutrient needs by the plant, nutrient demand, a lot of really beneficial stuff as far as understanding what you're using, how to use it most effectively, when to put it on to get the most out of it, what other things control that as far as yield limiters or bottlenecks in the system, right? And so one of the big things that I'm really excited to talk about is nitrogen, which is something that a lot of people now are using 32 or 28, with ATS. And why that I feel like is such an important topic for us to kind of really dive into quite a bit today is it's one of the number one things that as a farmer, we're spending money on, right? I mean, if you think about it like this, 72 cents a unit right now for 32?
We sell 72 cents a unit as well.
So think about it like this, if you got $4 corn and you're spending 72 cents per bushel on nitrogen, that makes up almost 20% of your total input, or not your input cost, but of your total revenue is tied up in one thing, right? And so then that becomes a huge yield lever for us, because the more efficient that is, right? Now that's 72 cents. If it can make 1.1 bushels, right? Now we're making $4.40. That extra 40 cents off that same input has a huge leverage, a huge impact on the farm. And so can you turn down the brightness of this light just a smidge? It's like I'm looking into the sun looking at you guys. Y'all look great. From my angle, you're just a little camera on a stick, but still, everybody looks great. So we'll talk about that quite a bit. We're going to talk about micronutrients. We're going to talk about timing, placement, the tools we use, the tools that we have the most success with when we have them, and also just the overall. That's perfect, Sierra. You're good. Yeah, that's perfect. And the overall approach. And I wanted Tim here because Tim's been with Agritech for 9 years?
Yeah, going on 10.
Going on 10?
Yes,
Look at you, almost a decade.
Almost a decade.
And he is extremely knowledgeable when it comes to corn and soybeans. He does a ton of research, ton of reading, ton of learning, and what all of that results in is him being a fantastic person for me, because I love to call Tim and talk about ideas, and talk about approaches, and talk about different things that I'm trying. And I love to hear the different things that he's doing and how he's having success. And this right here is exactly what, if you've been in one of these webinars that I love to come back to, which is, hey, the more we talk, the more we work together in this industry and as farmers, the better it is for everybody. And that's one thing that, I tell a lot of people, listen, your competition, it's not your guy next door, right? He's not who's hurting the market. It's the other countries, right? And that's one thing that I take a lot of pride in with Agritech is our focus is United States farmers, is United States dirt, is United States corn and soybeans and cotton and rice and hay, and how to make things better here at home. Porque si hablo español. Yo viví en Sudamérica para 5 años. I can speak Spanish. I live down there. Okay, it's not for a lack of ability. It's for a lack of heart. And where our heart lies is not there. It's here. It's in our homeland where we care about our neighbor and helping each other, right? Do you like that? You didn't know I was going to throw a little Spanish out there. Huh?
Not.
That's all the Spanish I speak. That and uno taco más, por favor, con una cerveza.
One more, I know what that means. And kind of going off what Nathan said is this, it's an old saying of just knowledge is power, and for me personally, I feel like the human race has made as far as we have today is because we're a species that groups together and we share knowledge to move us forward step by step, which allows us to have better planning, better tools to push forward as a species. And when it comes to this and focusing on United States and our farming techniques, it only makes sense to share. If you're sharing, you're learning, you're doing stuff better, you're being more efficient. At the end of the day, that makes everyone happier, makes everyone more money, and that's what we're here for.
And that is one thing. I'm glad you brought that point up because I love science. I've always loved science since I was a kid. I thought it was fascinating. Followed very closely with mechanics and engineering. My dad still loves to tell stories about how I would run alongside in the field, following the equipment, trying to figure out how it was working when I was like 5 or 6. I love those things, but one thing that I love more than either of those, and always have, is numbers. I'm a numbers guy. I'm gonna have a hard time remembering your name, but I'm good. I'm good at numbers, and I like numbers, and numbers drive everything, right? And not just when I talk about numbers, I'm talking about not just gallons and quarts and ounces. I'm talking about dollars and cents, right? And
it matters.
It is, and it matters more right now than ever. Of like every input that we use, everything that we do, we have to be looking at it from a financial and an agronomic lens at the same time. That's why I tell people, I'm like, if you're going to be a good farmer, you've got to be a CFO level finance, understanding. You've got to have an agronomy degree, a chemistry degree, a climate degree. You've got to be good at a dozen different things, be a mechanic. I feel like farmers are naturally some of the smartest people because they have to do so many different things.
It's almost taking it a step further than jack of all trades. You got to be kind of a master of several.
No kidding, man.
You know what I mean?
You do. And that's one of the areas that today we want to kind of talk about quite a bit. But one of the things that we bring to the table as a company is looking at things from an agronomic lens, but also from a financial lens. And the thing I tell everybody is like, listen, I'm a practical guy. I'm not going to tell you to do something that I wouldn't do myself, right? And I'm also not going to tell you like, oh man, this, this product, it's only $10 an acre. It's freaking awesome. You're going to love it. It's the best thing ever, blah, blah, blah. Okay, but that $10 in my book, especially if it's its own pass, well, now I've got $8 to $10 associated with getting it out there.
Yeah.
Not to mention all the other time and stuff of dealing with it on the farm. So, but just in fuel and product, now it's $20 really, which means I need to double that. I need to make at least 4 bushel on my bean different. And I'm talking average, not on one spot with the yield maker, across the field to justify that, right? If it's not doubling at least, right, then okay, maybe if I'm high yield, I'm looking for those last few bushels, things like that, maybe they're worth looking at. But if I'm a practical everyday farmer looking to be financially successful on my farm, be agronomically successful in my inputs, then I have to look at everything through that lens. And that's exactly the way that we look at things. And because it really is a twofold scenario. And I know that you're going, I mean, that's a given, right? But a lot of times I feel like can be missed in some of the marketing that we get with different specialty products and things like that. And so without further ado, we shared that last reminder text we sent out, had the itinerary on it, correct? Sierra's over here. Sierra is a master wingman in it. She's going to help throw stuff on the screen when I fail to do so.
I didn't know you knew what an itinerary is, Nathan. That's
Can't spell it, but I know what it is. And so I'm going to do my best to follow that itinerary. I'm going to do my best to not keep you here till 10 o'clock at night, because easily, as per usual, we could talk about this for hours and hours and hours and hours. And I'm going to try not to rabbit trail too much. But what up, Lane? But with that being said, I do want to keep this somewhat of an open discussion, right? If you have questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. We've got other agronomists here that'll be helping out answering stuff as we go. If there's certain things that we want to answer, live, or be more beneficial to discuss more in depth, Sierra's going to flag those things, and at 4 o'clock and then at 5 o'clock. So we're going to take a break each hour. And at those hour gaps, while we're on break, it's going to be a Q&A, right? So I'll run through some of the questions. You could throw other questions in there. My main request for you is this. If you have very specific stuff that you're looking for answers on, don't hesitate to throw it in there by all means. But there might be some things where just because of the time today, might say, hey, reach out, let's talk about that, right? We want to do the most with our time. So if it's something that is a very specific scenario, like, hey, I'm dealing with iron toxicity in my soil, what do I do? I love that topic. I'll jump into it, but I'm going to keep it brief. We should get more into detail in person or over the phone with those kinds of things. So I'm just giving you a heads up that if it feels like some of the answers are brief, just because we're trying to stick to the schedule here and not do what I normally do and get through 2 pages of my 20 pages of notes.
That's what I meant about. I don't know if you knew what an itinerary was there.
Yeah, I know that. You're right. No, I'm great at making them and then totally ignoring them. All right. So what I want to kind of start out with is our process. And I love our process is always evolving and developing. And I feel like that should be the case with anything that we do. And I was just talking to somebody the other day. I was like, what's the thing that we're missing in agriculture? And I loved the response that I got. They said, if we treat every year on a farm like a science experiment, that we're studying everything that happens, then every year we get better and better and better and better. And then we pass that knowledge on to our kids, and they get tools to farm really, really well. And the cool thing about that is now we have so many tools that we can use to understand the impacts, to understand what is affecting that crop, whether it's in-depth, S3C soil tests, whether it's soil respiration tests, soil DNA tests, tissue samples, sap analysis, right? All of these different things tell a story. And it's funny, one of the things that tells a huge story that I feel like a lot of people miss, and we'll talk about some today, is your test weights, right? Everybody wants to look at the yield map. This part of the field this part of the field that. That's part of the story, right? But your test weight, believe it or not, tells me more about what you're doing and what that plant's missing at the end of the year than any harvest map is going to say, yield map, than any soil sample is going to say. Because what I have found, and I'm sure you found this as well, Tim, is sometimes you get in and you look at the soil and everything's awesome. And then you pull a tissue sample and you go, oh, what's there isn't here. What's going on, right?
Yeah, I mean, a great example, and I'm sure we'll dig a little bit more into this a little bit later on in the conversation, but a great example of that with sap and tissue sampling is NO3, your nitrate levels. Green crops do not necessarily mean great bushels, right? Your carbohydrates doesn't always transfer to how much nitrate is inside the plant. So you could have a ton of available nitrogen in the soil, and you could have a ton of available nitrogen in the plant in a nitrate form. But if it's not transferring over to a protein or an amino acid for some reason, that doesn't translate to great bushels. And so that's the stories that sap and tissue sampling tell you at the end of the season or mid-season, midway through the season, is where are those levers or what's stopping us from taking that in soil nutrient base and transferring it to what we want, which is the bushels and tonnage and things of that nature at the end of the season.
Exactly. So, and that's Yeah, getting into the micronutrients. I'm excited for that part of today because we're going to talk about how different micronutrients increase or decrease efficiencies. So hopefully you guys are plenty excited. I'm plenty excited. Are we recording this for anybody that's not going to get it later? Cool. So if at any point you got to dip out, got dinner with family or something, just know that we are going to record this and send out the recording and within the next week. It'll be live within a few days before the weekend. Cool. So if you missed part of it or like, man, I didn't hear what they were talking about, I had to answer a phone call. We are going to record all this for you to come back to later for people that couldn't be here to be able to jump in and go through it as well. So with that being said, I want to talk a little bit about the agri-tech support system. Let me see if I can figure out how to share stuff. Oh, look at that. I can. Okay, now I got to figure out. Hang on, I'm going to share my screen with you guys. I got to figure out. There it is. Okay. Sweet. We got stuff. All right, what we build and how we support your farm, right? So this is going into some of that data tracking, right? It all starts. In fact, you know what, Sarah? I'm going to toss the controls to you because I want you to pull up some of those analyses. It all starts with first understanding as much as we can about your farm, right? The more data that you give me or Tim or anybody, any of the agronomists here at Agritech to start out with and to start working with, the more effective we're going to be, right? And sometimes the data I'm asking for is stuff that you might not even have. You're going, oh yeah, I've got soil samples, tissue samples, all my yield data on this pivot. I want you to tell me, put together a program. Like, cool, where's your water analysis? This actually happened right before today's meeting, and they went, what do you mean? I went, your water, like the water coming out of the pivot. Where's the analysis on that? There's stuff in there, right? We want to know if that's positively or negatively impacting the crop. And the more that data that we can bring in, the more effective we can be at putting together analysis. So I grabbed a couple that I've done in the last week. We redacted CIA style some of the information on these, just to not be sharing everything about everybody's farm. But if you'll go and scroll down through that, basically what this is taking the data for this farm, right? And this person might even be in here today going, hey, I recognize that because this is a real one, and saying, okay, let's analyze everything from the perspective of maximizing ROI, right? What's hurting the yield the most? Go back up a little bit. And what different factors are impacting different things, right? And so with that being said, go ahead and go to page 5 on there. Keep going. One more. There we go. So I want you to kind of just scroll through this so that you can kind of get an idea of what we're looking at. Now, not all of these are the exact same, right? And the reason they're not all the exact same is because the data that different people have stop there. It isn't always the exact same. And so this was taking yield data and soil sample data and saying, okay, let's do an analysis of what's currently limiting your yield the most, right? As well as some of the inputs that the farm is using. And so if you're like, man, I want one of these, right? I want something like this for my farm. This looks super cool. It is super cool. I love it. Also, it's super hot in here. So if I'm sitting here touching my face a bunch, I'm a sweater. I'm wearing a sweater. I should probably take that off.
We got one little fan in here, and it's we both run pretty hot.
Yeah. I was at a farm week before last in Illinois, and they were like, hey, are they ever going to get you like an AC unit? I was like, they got one. It just doesn't do much. And thank you. And he was like, yeah, because, man, he's like, watching those, you sitting in there sweating like crazy. I wonder if Eric's in here. And I was like, I know. I think they just torture me. It's like a sweat chamber. But yeah, so with that being said, if you're like, I want one of these for my farm, one of this type of in-depth analysis, any data that you have is beneficial. But the biggest and most impactful things to understand is obviously a soil test, preferably an up-to-date one, preferably an S3C or something similar, micronutrient levels, nitrogen levels. If you can get ones that even show like, I know there's a lot of labs showing like carbon levels, carbon nitrogen ratio, nitrogen release potential. Those are great. We can actually deduce a lot of that from an S3C as well. But any of those, little more detail soil samples is a must, right? That's a must starting point. And then yield data is the next thing that's super helpful to understand. Okay, what is actually coming out of the field, right? Because sometimes just that story alone, I look at a field and I go, okay, everything about this is great except for a couple things. And then you look at the yield data and you're like, yep, this field that should be making 65 bushel beans is making 50 because of two things that are easy fixes that are holding back 15 bushel. And if you think I'm BSing, have me out to the farm sometime. I'll sit down and I'll prove it to you. And if I've been to your farm at any point, then hopefully that's exactly what happened. If not, don't tell me. But no, I'm just kidding. No, that's one of my favorite things to do is sit down and look at a soil sample and then tell people what it's yielding. And they're like, how do you know that?
It's always impressive,
See it.
Those small yield limiters is what I like to, refer to them as. Is every piece of the puzzle that we can get as far as data is important, because at the end of the day, you want to like it to try to build a puzzle, and the goal to accomplish is I want to be able to guess what the final outcome of this is without the front of the box, right?
Right.
And the quicker you guess that, the more money you make. And that's how it is with farming in this data is the more pieces that we can put together for you and the earlier in the season is going to allow us to make decisions on those ROI levers that are going to save you late season and eventually, ultimately make you that money.
And here's one thing I want to add to this is if you are like, man, the lab I use or the company I use already does a great job with giving me recs, by all means, send those too, right? And it's not because their recs are wrong, but go to the next page on here. It might be back a page, but part of what go back a couple pages. Part of what we're gonna talk, analyze in here is not just you need this, right? So hey, zinc is a limiter in this field. Boron's a limiter in this field. This is how much it can potentially improve. And not always going to be super conservative on the crystal ball stuff, right? But it's going off of meta-analysis of all data that we have that's published in the industry, compiled into a system that helps us understand, okay, I'll give you an example. The meta-analysis right now for pH impact on beans is 18.2% yield loss and a 5.5 pH versus a 6.5 pH, right? And by meta-analysis, taking all the data, all the university studies, every bit of data that we have, go back to the recommendations, the chart, the tables, and that's where we're taking estimations from, and then we're pulling that back a bunch. So if it's like, hey, LSU did a study, was that last year, where zinc increased bushels on corn, 2 pounds of zinc increased bushel on corn by 82 bushels.
Yeah.
I am not going to go to every farmer and be like, listen, if we get zinc in here, we're going to make an extra 82 bushel. That would be ridiculous, right? But it is really cool to see those kind of studies and see just how much impact that can have. Mm-hmm. And then we'll walk through some of the reasons why. Dude, okay, we're only 30 minutes in, but still, we're going to be blazing today. You put your seatbelt on. And so that's part of what we want to look at is like, why we use different things, how to use different things most effectively, because there's certain things that are super finicky, and that's part of like the data packet that I like to send out to people. And one thing that I'm actually working on right now to put together is it's called a micronutrient masterclass. If you want to get a copy of that, send a message in, send a text in, ask them for it. But what it is essentially 20-page piece on boron, a 20-page on zinc, on manganese, on molybdenum, on copper, on cobalt, on all these different micronutrients, that especially the ones that are on your soil test, so that you can understand like what's good, what's bad, when's it good, when's it bad. Because More is not always the answer, right? And how much is that helping or hurting? Because my soil test says it's got an L next to it, but what does that mean? What does it mean that why okay, I got a 0.2 on my boron. VL actually is probably what that show up. Okay, I need some boron, but it helps understand, okay, what is boron doing? How is it impacting? And what is the result? Because it's not as simple as the thing about agronomy that I love, but is also kind of a bugger, is every action, the laws of physics here, doesn't necessarily have an equal and opposite reaction in the way that you would think, because instead of one swinging ball hitting the other and it taking off, it's a marble in a thrown into a pile of marbles, and everything moves. Everything changes, right? And so when it's like, oh, boron can have a huge yield impact. Well, is that just because of pollination, or is it because of the other things that it's doing in the cell, or increasing nitrogen efficiency from enzyme to ATP? Yes, to all, right? It's impacting many different things. And so that's why you see little things have such a big impact, is because if that little thing is creating a bottleneck where that corn plant or that bean plant is having to burn more energy to do the same process, that means less efficiency in nitrogen, which means I'm having to use more of my most expensive input to get the bushels I need.
And that's why it's so important to focus on things like precision and timing beat everything else. Like you said, more of something doesn't necessarily mean a positive impact. And now, obviously, if you throw something down that your plant or your soil is lacking, you're going to have a positive impact. But the timing and precision on when you do it triggers a lot of different little processes in the plant biology, which can help you or hurt you at the end of the day. And so precision and timing is so important when you're dealing with these little case-by-case basis nutrients.
And also fixing problems, right?
Yeah.
So like one of the problems I've run into quite a bit recently is like root development. And this is a super important thing. Would you pull up the growth chart? That's the next thing I want to go through, is like growth stage chart, the in-depth one. Let's start with the corn. And why a plant needs different things at different times. And zinc's a really interesting one, because there's a plant is a corn plant, bean plant, wheat, cotton, whatever. I know today we're talking about corn and beans specifically, but not that. You've got the master sheet. Oh my goodness. I'll tell you what, why don't you stop and I'll share my screen. Okay. So it's a manufacturing plant. Pun intended. Right? So what are the two main things that drive a manufacturing plant? Supply chain, right? And then energy. The energies, the workers that are doing it, the electricity, everything that it needs to make the product, right? When you boil down a corn plant or a bean plant, to understand that your supply chain is your roots primarily, right? If you're full or you're feeding, tissue then becomes a supply chain as well. But your primary supply chain for moisture, for nutrients, for everything the plant needs is the root system. So we want to start with building a really strong supply chain, right? What are the two things that build the strongest supply chain?
I mean, it's going to be soil health and your rhizome health.
Yes. And to put that into easier layman's terms, phosphorus and zinc, right?
Yeah.
Those are your primary drivers of root growth and root development. Same with your second stage of energy supply, right? What's the primary energy supply for a plant? Guess what? It's not the UAN that you're putting out there. It's the leaves, right? The majority of a plant's energy comes from the sun. Oh man, you should read the master class on manganese and its impact. In fact, I'm going to pull that one up. I said I wouldn't rabbit trail. Here's the first rabbit trail. Here we go, rabbit trail. Come on. Here we go. Anyway,
you can tell our conversations that we have every day, they don't go very far.
They go a long way. It's just not in a straight line. Okay. But yeah, so that second phase is the power supply. Guess what? Two primary drivers there, aside from structurally needing the potassium early, which is a small amount, is phosphorus and zinc. So what's most important for me to be focusing on early? Phosphorus and zinc. And this goes back to the core of the mindset behind how we build our program, right, is I want to set up a plant early to get the most out of the ground that it can. And that's not just so it has more access to fertilizer I might be spreading. No. Not even close, right? What it actually is to get the most out of the ground so I'm not having to spread more. The more that plant can get from the soil, the more effective it's going to be throughout its life, and the better I'm going to get yield, the better economically the farm's going to be, because the less I have to put in, the more nutrient cycling I'm going to get, etc. So when you see like, oh yeah, put zinc in your furrow, well, why that's now becoming a very popular thing is because, well, the more I can drive that root system to develop early, the bigger supply chain I have, which means root exudation and that rhizosphere that Tim spoke of. Mr. Microbiologist over here, slow down, keep it easy for us. That rhizosphere now, I am redoxing and mineralizing more soil, releasing more phosphorus from the ground that I already have, releasing more potassium from the ground I already have, more calcium, more magnesium from the soil structure, right? We're going to back up and do a quick 101. If you go Google this, actually, just Google what % of the soil by weight is made up of potassium. It'll tell you that it's like 0.5 to 2.5 or 3%, right? On average, in most U.S. soils, you're sitting right around that 2%-ish range. So if you take an acre of dirt 6 inches deep, apply that logic to it, it's about 2.2 million pounds, right? So you're sitting on roughly 50,000 pounds of potassium in the first 6 inches. And you're like, holy cow, why am I spreading potash? Well, why am I putting potash out there? Why are we even going to talk about foliar feeding potassium? Well, just because we've got it as part of soil structure doesn't mean we're using it. And what your soil test is looking at isn't total potassium by weight in the soil. It's the exchangeable pool. One of the primary things that we want to drive in our program and in our system is increasing that exchangeable pool, increasing how much ppm of potassium and phosphorus you're seeing on the soil sample, so that we're able to use more of what you've already got. This doesn't mean draining the soil down, because here's the fun fact, right? Let's just take removal rate, right? 200 pounds of, 200 bushel of corn. If it's removing 100 pounds of potassium from the soil, and you've got, I'm going to do this on my calculator so you don't think I'm making stuff up, and you've got 50,000 pounds just in the first 6 inches, right? And we're pulling just from the grain 100 pounds of that out per year. Well, we've got 500 years in the first 6 inches before you got to worry about it, right? And this is part of the reason you're starting to see soil samples measure the total amount. And they're not extremely accurate yet, but we're going to get there, so that you can understand, like, hey, what is the release potential of my soil? Because a lot of times it's more than you really ever thought it was.
I would say that it's actually quite the opposite of draining your soil. It's replenishing your soil. That mineralization process is giving you access to a form of P and K that you never would have touched before, that wouldn't have showed up on your soil test to begin with when you're talking about available soluble nutrients to the plant, or that pool that he mentioned. And so yeah, that mineralization of that first 6 to 12 inches of P and K, the more that we can make soluble to the plant, the more we're actually replenishing your soil. And at the end of the day, it is you could call it a finite resource. 500 years is a number, but
in the first 6 inches,
yeah.
I plan to farm at least 18 to 24 inches.
Yeah, and so, but at the end of the day, it's resources that we never would have had contact or access to without some sort of higher mineralization process in that root zone. Right,
exactly. And so, with that being said, what the process that we're building, what the direction that the ag industry as a whole is going in, this isn't just an agri-tech thing, right? Is using more of the soil to feed the crop, to make us more profitable. We are honestly behind the curve here in the US. If you look at Brazil, or if you look at India, they are using almost no not, I don't want to say no, but very little synthetic inputs compared to the US, and focusing heavily on micronutrients, heavily on biology, heavily on redox and mineralization. And so we want to feed the soil and feed the system to encourage that right from the jump, right? By adding in the things that give us more nutrient cycling by developing a deeper root system, give us more nutrient holding capacity by sequestering more carbon from the air and putting that in the ground, as well as supplying, carbon in the form of like biochar or humic or fulvic to the soil for that same reason. If anybody here at Agritech is watching this here at the main office, can you please turn the AC on? Anyway, and so this is one that's really interesting. Why I wanted to jump back over to manganese for just a second is manganese. I'm just going to read this straight from the masterclass document that if you send that email that Sierra sent, said to, you'll get copies of these for all the micronutrients. It's a core energy production component, right? So inside the photosystem, the PS2, manganese-based cluster stores oxidizing power to split water, which releases oxygen and feeds electrons. So fun fact, photosynthesis is a process of the plant taking light energy, wavelengths of light, stripping protons and electrons off of that wavelength of light and binding them to oxygen and to carbon to be used as ATP, cellular energy, by the plant. So the more efficient that plant is at using cellular energy, the less synthetic input it needs from its nodules. That's not synthetic, but from its nodules to supply energy, or from the 32 and 28 that we're using to supply energy to that plant.
Yeah.
Fascinating stuff, right? That's just one component of what it does, but that is a heavy implication on reducing the need for certain inputs or getting more out of the inputs we're using. And that's where you start seeing guys go, oh yeah, I'm growing, I'm at a 0.62 units of N per bushel used or per bushel made. Well, it's not just getting more nitrogen into the plant. It's using every bit of energy that plant is getting more effectively. That's the sun. That's the nitrogen that you're applying. That's the nitrogen that's being released from the soil. So I won't go too crazy on the manganese, but this is why, like, if you're a nerd like me and like to learn about stuff and these masterclass documents that I'm putting together, very cool stuff. So you pulled up the basic one. I'm going to pull up the more in-depth version of the phase by phase, and then also pull up kind of the standard program. And we're going to talk about that with corn. Do you guys know anything about prairie food? We have a restaurant over here called Prairie House. It's got pretty decent food. No, I'd like to know more about that, Lane. If you want to reach out, I'm always down to learn about something. All right, corn. There we go. So I'm going to share my screen here and walk through with you guys a couple different things. That, and then we're going to look at here. I'm going to go ahead and share it so you can see what I'm seeing. This is the what's in the zip file that I've been sending people. So if you're like, Nate, email me a zip full of documents, and all I did was ask for some information. Well, this is what you're getting. Should probably move that over. And so in here, we've got all kinds of really cool stuff. These justification sheets aren't the master class, right? So I'm going to just click on the manganese one. It's just a brief on how to use it, what it helps with, what it does. So photosynthesis right there, metabolic enzyme cofactor, stress and disease interaction. So helps a bunch with supporting a corn plant, supporting a bean plant against fungal issues, against drought, and those different things. And then some fun studies in here about like the yield impact of deficient corn. In this is all the corn file of deficient corn versus treated corn, and the yield impact of seeing a 19 bushel difference where manganese was added to the system. 19 bushel over something that takes very, very little.
Yeah.
Very, very little, right? And so this is the corn growth stage and nutrient timing. And then the main program is what I want to pull up here. This right there. All right. Let me make sure that this is sharing. It wasn't sharing the right screen. No wonder you guys probably saying, what's this guy talking about? All right, here we go. Bang. Now you're seeing what I'm saying. All right, so this corn-based program. Ignore all the price on here. It's a little outdated. But then this is the growth stage. So I like to overlay these because what this is showing, and this is one of my favorite documents to sit down and go through with people, is what a plant needs, how strong its demand is based on growth stage or GDU, right? And then how we can help support that system, help support that plant at each stage. And that doesn't mean, we're going across it with the sprayer.
Yeah.
8 different times. Right? Just means, hey, let's build a program, let's build a system that really thinks forward. So one thing that I see a lot of guys doing is they're like, hey, sulfur is super important. I got to get sulfur out there now. 100%. The issue is I see a lot of people putting a bunch of it up front, or maybe all of it up front. Well, if you look at these in depth, phase by phase, the majority of the sulfur need by the plant happens during the reproductive phase. Why? Because sulfur helps to make protein. That's when it's making the most protein, so it needs the most. Well, if I'm running ATS early on, is that making it all the way to grain fill? No. More often than not, ATS, ammonium thiosulfate, once it's in a plant available form in the soil, that's elemental sulfur, right? You've got 2 to 4 weeks before volatilization can remove a lot of it.
Extremely
right?
mobile nutrient.
Very mobile. Right. Very mobile. And so if we're putting it all up front, it can actually cause negative repercussions on yield, but it also isn't fixing the main thing that we're paying for it to do. And so it's being smart about going, okay, how much do I need then versus later? And this is kind of what I want to walk through with a few different things so that really when I say this corn-based program to me is almost kind of it's a great tool, right? And it's a tool that you can look at and go, hey, Beck's PFR, if you follow them at all, they did a high yield study using liquid only. And our corn program, our bean program are very, very similar in the approach of timing and the approach of the nutrients that we're supplying to get the most out of it. And obviously we're not, shooting for 400 bushel on every farm, and nor should we. But this just is a very useful addition to see, hey, if you're switching over to liquid or thinking about switching over to liquid, it's very helpful to have a tool like this to go, okay, it's possible to not only make 200 bushel or 250 bushel, but to make 400 bushel and 135 bushel beans using liquid programs and do it more cost effectively than doing a dry only program. Right. And I'm not saying that it's like liquid is better than dry, but I am saying that in this scenario and what we're going to walk through, there's more ways to use the tools at our disposal when we're able to feed things in different ways, which liquid gives us that possibility. All right. So getting into this table a little bit, I want to just kind of walk through. So if you don't know what GDU is, it's growing degrees units. It's fancy terminology to determine what growth stage that plant is at, just like the V stages, right? So V stages are the amount of collars on the plant, more or less, right? Depending on the genetics you're using. But a more accurate gradient is actually looking at the growing degree units and what that plant needs during those times. So let's just walk through. What time is it? Wait, 3:45. Let's walk through this before we take a break. You good with that?
Yeah.
And then we'll spend the first half of the next hour going through the nutrients that we use, micros, macros, everything to address all of this. And then we'll kind of jump and start and go through the same with beans. Beans and corn are obviously different in different ways, but a lot of the support mechanisms are going to be the same. Now, with that being said, so planting to emergence is what we're looking at first. Look at that. Phosphorus, high. Zinc, high. Why?
Early vigor.
Right.
Yeah.
Developing that root system. Here's something, too, to stop up for a moment and just throw out a note. If you're like, hey, I got tons of phosphorus in my soil, but it just seems like I'm not getting a lot of early vigor. I love that you use that word. What's the deal? Nate, you're telling me that phosphorus is what I need. Well, I got the phosphorus and I'm putting zinc out too, but I just don't feel like I'm seeing it. One of the things that's very important to look at is the phosphorus in my soil in a state that it can be taken up easily by the plant, right?
I.e. phosphorus cycling. That's one of the things that with phosphorus, and one of the things that I think really separates the liquid ortho products from the dry products, they all have their place in the industry. But when you have phosphorus cycling in cold, wet soils, your root systems are naturally moving sluggish. The phosphorus cycling is really slow in those type of soils, early spring soils. And so when you have a type of phosphorus that's immediately available and a type of zinc that's immediately available to the root for uptake, it pretty much accelerates that process for you. It kind of sidesteps those cold soils, the phosphorus cycling problems, and gives you an immediate boost, which allows you to do all the things we were talking about earlier. But one of the things that I think is a more common way to explain it is that root vigor, root mass, root length, root density, things of those nature. But root length being one of the big ones. If we get you into your nitrogen zone before the water shuts off, what that does is it cuts back on late season stressors, heat stressors, and it allows you to keep growing. So we don't have to wait for those roots to slowly make their way down to that nitrogen source.
Root architecture. That's one of the documents in this folder. Which, if you want to get your own copy of this little folder, let me know, and we'll send one out to you. In fact, Sierra made it real easy by combining everything in here into one PDF that I can send people. But I'll send both, and then basically, root architecture is a huge one. This is an aerate piece about loosening up the soil. But you're right. It's not just about, growing a ton of root mass. It's about where is that root mass going. Exactly. The further down it gets in the soil, the more we protect ourselves late season against drought conditions, the more we're taking up potassium to get good test weights, to get good grain fill, to avoid pot abortion, to avoid tip back, right? Because that's one of the things that kind of cracks me up too. Is like I've seen pictures in like product books of like, hey, use this potassium foliar feed, and the comparison photos are 2 ears of corn treated and untreated, and they both have tip back. And I'm like, neither of them have enough potassium, man. You shouldn't put that in your book. That was a terrible illustration for how to solve the problem because you didn't fix it. You just picked a longer ear. But yeah, root architecture is huge because especially in like the last few years, and deeper we get that root system, the more nutrients we're getting out of the ground, the more water access we have later in the year, which that is needed for osmosis and for taking up. The more redox we have, the more potassium we're taking in from the soil, which we have to have, going back over here to my nifty little chart, which we have to have during that grain fill the more than any other time. There it is. So we're going to jump all the way to grain fill, right? More than any other time, your potassium is needed for grain fill. Why? Because that is one of the primary building blocks. Yeah. Right. And I always say it like this. I'm like, phosphorus is process. It's blood flow. It's driving the system. Potassium is your 2x4s. It's your brick and mortar, right? Calcium is your drywall. It's what's holding, casing everything, holding it together. Zinc, that's your mortar between the bricks. It increases the strength of those bonds, which decreases moisture loss during drought. Then your potassium, man, that structural component is needed the most when we're building the most structure. And here's what's really cool is plants will draw out of their own tissue to meet the need of the grain, right? Because their ultimate goal is reproduction. So they're going to meet the need of that grain, but they can't store 100% of the needed potassium to fill your target yields of 80 bushel beans or 75 bushel beans and 250 bushel corn. They can't store that much in the stalk and stem and leaves. And so you still have to be able to take it up. The deeper we have that root architecture, the more we're going to take up out of the ground. The more access we're going to have late season to that potassium and to that moisture in the soil that we need to get that, right? And as that topsoil starts to dry out and the tillers, that's the little hairs that take in nutrients on the roots, as those start to close to protect themselves because it's too dry, your lower tillers are still working. They're still feeding. They're still keeping your test weights up. So if you look at your test weights and you're like, man, my test weights are always kind of low, or man, I wish I'd get my test weights into the mid to high 60s. One of the first things you look at is late season potassium. Am I getting enough? If not, well, that's one of the highest ROI things that I've used personally is fuller feeding potassium, potassium carbonate, acetate, lactate, all three great tools, all three specific to how we're doing it, when we're doing it, et cetera, what we're mixing it with, right? But all of those are great tools to keep potassium need met, keep test weights up, keep bushels up. I've seen foliar feeding potassium on soil that had 288 parts per million. 288 parts per million. Okay, that's over 500 pounds of potassium in the soil on the soil test. Tissue samples came back low. Foliar fed 2 gallons of potassium carbonate. 20 bushel difference between treated and untreated. Nuts. On great ground. On great ground, but it was just a lack of moisture.
Yeah, lack of moisture, availability through that plant to uptake it.
Right.
It's not availability in the soil, but for the actual physical process of taking that up. I mean, the way you think of roots is, in the root system is, if you go too extreme one way or the other, it's gonna be harsh on that plant, whether it was too cold for the soil or if it's too hot. And so when we reach that root architect and we get those lower areas of the soil, it helps out a ton because that is a more climate controlled area. That's like that root growing in the house instead of, with the AC on at 70 degrees or 68 degrees, whatever you like to set it at. It's a lot easier to do something like that.
Do you notice they turn the AC on?
Yeah, I did notice they turned the AC on. Right now we're having a lot less trouble. We're not focusing on the heat. We're talking to you guys. And so if you were to take outside and build a, any type of mechanism, if you're out in 30-degree weather, your hands move a lot slower. If you're out in 115 degree weather, you're sweaty, and when you're in that perfect atmosphere, and that's what that root architecture allows you to do. If we can, the sooner we can get it, the deeper is better, because that's going to protect and insulate us from from the outside pressures. And that's what's important about that.
Amen. I totally agree. All right. Coming up on a break. Thank you to everybody that's hanging out through this. I know it's going to be a long one, but trust me, it'll be worth it once we get past all the rambling. What's in here too, if you've noticed, is like different ways to fix these things, right? Different options to help feed. Don't hold too much weight to this, because once again, every farm is. I'm not even screen sharing. Every farm is different, right? Every year is different. The tool that we use this year might be different than the tool that we use next year to fix the same problem. Right. Yeah. And sometimes it's just different based on the equipment, right? If it's like, hey, I'm using a drone instead of a Haggy. Oh, okay. Well, we need to make some adjustments so that we're getting better usage out of the mode of application. Right. Or, hey, it's really hot this year when I'm going to be, running this. So maybe we should change the type of potassium that we're feeding, or the type of micronutrient that or stack that we're running to address different needs, right? And this is part of the reason why we tissue sample and offer that to our customers all throughout the year, so that we can continuously understand what those needs are, what's not being met by the plant, what high ROI mechanisms we can use to ensure that the farm is getting the most out of its operation, economically speaking. And so I guess we'll go ahead. I want to run down through this real quick so that we can look at a couple things. I'm going to just go to the main chart.
We told him we would take care of this before break.
You're right. So
we'll
we'll just quickly go by stage, right? So early on, phosphorus and zinc, obviously still at V2 to V4 or 120 to 350 GDUs, still very high demand. Sulfur starting to come up. So getting a little sulfur out early, still important, right? It's just a matter of how much, right? So usually I say, if nothing else, run 30-70, right? And honestly, if you can do the same with your nitrogen, then you get the most. That comes down to, well, how much can we actually get? So on here it says 15. Really, in the ultimate world for your UAN, it'd be like 5 to 10, and then at your first side dress, wide drop, first knife in is when you're running the most. But the problem with that is, then I'm coming and I'm telling people, hey, you're going to run 10 gallons and then you're going to run 30 and 30. And they're like, no, I'm not. I can't do that. Or, hey, you're going to run 10, 25, 45. And they're like, yeah, no, I can't do that. And I'm like, I get it.
And that comes back to that
part
nutrient
of
uptake chart that he showed you earlier. And he said, we're not talking about making 10 passes. You have to do what makes the most sense logically for equipment, areas, and things of that nature. But, the more that you can get, close to those times, the more efficient it's going to be for you.
Exactly. So moving on to V5, V6, right? That's we're sitting now about a foot and a half out of the ground or so. About knee high. That's what it's always knee high. Then your nitrogen usage is starting to come up. Why? Because the amount of energy the plant needs is continuously increasing. Along with it, sulfur is following that same trend. Potassium is now starting to be more in demand because we're putting on a lot more structure as that plant gets tall. Calcium is a key to success there because that's driving cell division, root tips, and root elongation and tissue strength, right? And then your zinc's driving your enzymes. Here's something just to back out for just a second. Nitrogen is an energy source. That energy source goes from nitrogen to amino acid to an enzyme to ATP to RUBP, right? This is the in-depth, PhD level of how plant energy works. Every stage of that transition for the plant has catalysts. When those catalysts, things like zinc, manganese, cobalt, magnesium, nickel.
Yeah, nickel.
Nickel, funny enough. When those things are met, there's no beaver dams, there's no bottlenecks. That nitrogen is turning into energy, usable energy, and then grain and tissue much more efficiently. And we're getting more bushels, more bang for our buck on the nitrogen dollars, right? Yeah. So the two things that we look at there and that we're going to look at after the break is nitrogen uptake efficiency and then nitrogen efficiency processes and how we improve those. So as those are starting to trend up, why are those trending up? Because all of this energy that we're starting to trend up, we're also having to start trending up the magnesium, the zinc to support the chemical process, the biological process in the plant of turning that energy into actual tissue. Right. And here's a fun thing too, is if you get a soil or a tissue sample, make sure that you get a tissue sample that shows nitrogen total and nitrate nitrogen. The reason is you could pull a tissue sample. This is if you're going to take anything away from today, to take this. If you pull a tissue sample, your plant can show that it's really great. Nitrogen levels are great. You're like, heck yeah, great. Everything's awesome, right? But without seeing the nitrate, right, or we're not able to measure enzymes or aminos. What you might be actually seeing is a beaver dam. Like, oh, well, there's a ton of nitrogen in the plant. That's great. Not if it's backed up, because what happens when it backs up? One, it's costing us more nitrogen dollars to make what we need to make, right? And if we fix that with whatever micronutrient might be missing in the process, that turns into more yield. But most importantly, especially in a soybean, when that nitrogen, when that energy starts to back up, what is the plant going to do?
It's gonna stop producing. It's gonna stop.
It's gonna shut down nodules.
Yeah.
It's gonna say, hey, river's full, bud.
Yep.
Don't keep pumping more in. Well, that was a good pun. Don't keep pumping more in because we got more than we can handle, right? And you don't want that. We do not want that because
It's the exact scenario I was mentioning earlier, that green plants do not equal bushels.
Right.
It's great. It's great to I got mine over here. It's great to have a green plant. It's not a negative sign, obviously, at all, but it doesn't necessarily always translate into bushels. And we can dig more into this a little bit later after the break. But one of the things to pay attention to on a sap or tissue sample is going to be your NCE percentages, right? That's going to tell you what is your transfer rate. And if you compare that directly to your nitrate or your NO3 in the plant, having a medium to low NO3 or nitrate level with a high above, I would say 90 on your NCEs percentage is good, because what that means is we're using the nitrate and it is transferring. Something's transferring. Your transfer rate's high. And with that, and like I said, that means it's going into that process of turning into amino acids, turning into protein, turning into carbohydrates, filling the grain, having the fruiting body of that plant come to fruition. And so that, is one of those things that, along with your Brix levels, your EC levels, those are things to pay attention to in your soil sample or your tissue sampling and your sap sampling. It makes a big difference. If you're going to be doing those tests, you got to pay attention to them.
Right. All right. I feel like we ran through a lot of this. If you want to study this more in depth, everything today would take its own hour, right? And there's so much to get through today. So I'm going to take a quick little, breather. If you have questions now, shout them out in the chat. If you need to get up, stretch your legs, do whatever. Now it's time to do it. We'll take about 5 minutes, answer some questions, and then we'll keep rocking and rolling.
Let me go excuse myself to the restroom real quick.
Yeah, no worries. Timmy came rocketing down here from 3 hours away because he forgot which day of the week it was. It's getting busy around here. And I was like, hey, where are you at? I'm coming. All right, if you got any questions, shout them out in the chat. With that being said, while I'm waiting on any questions to come in, I'm going to kind of go over what we're going to talk about next. And how that'll be helpful. So, and if you have feedback on like, hey, can we just focus on like inputs or quantities of inputs? Totally cool with jumping straight into that. The reason all of this justification is going on is because then when we talk about the program or we talk about different things we're using, it makes a lot of sense. And you're not just going, oh, you're just throwing stuff at me to make it more complex. Guess what? It's already complex. I'm trying to simplify it and keep it as simple as you can by going, hey, this is one thing that we do, right? And is if we're going to need this micro and this, that, and this, and this, and this, and that, right? Man, adding all those things one at a time is tough. So let me just get a micro pack. Well, then the ratios might not be spot on for what your ground needs. And so then I still might not be actually solving the yield ceiling, or it might actually be causing other issues where I'm getting too much of something that I didn't need in there. So one thing that we do is throughout the year, I got a question. I'm going to jump to it, Andy. Throughout the year, when we're tissue sampling, when we're soil sampling to track the progress of that crop, we're using that data and we're using your initial data to build blends to maximize your dollars that you're spending to say, hey, if we can build a blend for you. And this is why part of the reason I said, ignore some of these numbers. If we can build a blend that's specific to your ground, to what you need, and it'll cut the cost down. So you're not having to be Mr. Mad Chemist out there, adding everything to the sprayer, to the planter. It helps both of us because one, it helps you with ease of use. It helps you with not having to pay for a bunch of totes and drums and 5-gallon buckets that you don't need once they're empty. If you do need them, it's still cheaper to get them empty than it is to get them full, right? You're not having to pay for extra logistics to get stuff out there. And so that's one thing that I feel like is really cool about what we do with this data and with your initial data is actually put together a program and blends that'll maximize this so that we're not just saying, hey, we're going to put 3H and 18 in furrow, but no, let's take that 3H and 18. We're going to add enzymes and aminos to help with root growth, plant health, rhizosphere, mineralization, etc. We're going to add in zinc at the proper amount. We're going to add in sulfur at the, a smaller amount. We're going to add in different things and build a blend. And what you'll end up doing, and I broke it down for Sierra earlier, I was like, when we do it like that, it's not drastic, but instead of doing all of this by itself and you end up, with a $40 per acre cost, now we're able to do the same thing for, $36. I think it came out to like $36.83 on that scenario with that soil I was showing you. And that $4 just right there on 1,000 acres, that's $4,000 that we can save, and it helps both of us. Right. And so that's one of the things that, if you're working with us, we've got standard blends, we've got standard stuff, but we've got the ability to say, hey, let's make a blend, let's make a stack, let's make these different things to match what we're needing to feed at that time. Right. So that when we come in and we're saying, hey, we need to foliar feed some potassium, we're going to use, potassium lactate. We're going to take that potassium lactate, we're going to add X amount of zinc, X amount of boron to it. We're also going to add a little bit of enzymes and aminos to it to help with stress because it's hot, and all of these things. Now we're getting all the ROI benefits and the yield increase benefits and the proven science behind it to back it up, but we're also doing it most cost effectively as possible. Andy, you said, I noticed on that one slide, you guys run boron and furrow on corn. Can you explain the benefits of doing so? Okay. That's actually a super good question because you get a lot of people saying, don't do that. And the reason they're saying don't do that is because it's super easy to get too much. Yeah. Super easy to get too much boron. I have this conversation almost every day with farmers of like, hey, in furrow, trace amounts. Trace amounts. You don't need a bunch, right? So like when we're running things like Bioactor Yield Maker in furrow, they have boron in them, but it's very small. It's a very small amount compared to what we're running later. And then later on, if we're running boron, and highly recommend you should be running a boron MEA, not a boric acid, because your uptake is going to be much higher. There's a lot of studies that were done with boric acid. And, hey, boron doesn't do anything to help yield. Well, yeah. Also, when you go back, you look at those studies, none of it made into the plant. Yeah. And the tissue didn't change. It was still boron deficient the whole time. Boron MEA will get into the plant through the tissue. Just like manganese. Manganese has to be foliar fed in a sulfate, manganese sulfate, to be most effective, right? This is the level of detail we get into on a program with somebody. But that little amount is because boron is a driver of cell division, right? Driver of growth, essentially, and growth rate and growth speed. And so if we can have a little bit early on, we're not only driving that growth, but where's the boron? Is there a boron yeah, Borolift. Okay. So this is specifically boron MEA for foliar feeding, but this is really, really great. So sugar transport, cell wall, and growing points. So boron supports cell wall formation. Oops, forgot to share my screen again. Hang on. That way you can see what I'm reading. All right, so boron supports cell wall formation and meristem growth. Deficiencies show up in newest tissue first, right? It also increases stress tolerance. And it's a big yield protector because it's one of your catalysts for nitrogen conversion in the plant. And we, right from the get-go, we want to maximize that, but we don't need a lot, right? So this is specifically foliar feeding boron, right? And the effects of that. And see that? This is what I'm talking about. It's like too much can be bad,
yeah,
right?
We can. And early on, and it's just specifically talking about soybeans, doesn't necessarily have to be an in-furrow placement. You know, we can do an on-row or 2x2 type of placement, or even with streamer nozzles next to the row. But boron early on has a direct connection to nodule sizes for your bean plants. You know, the bigger our nodules are, obviously the more nitrogen we're producing, more energy source we're producing for that bean plant. And so there's a lot of things, the flow of sugar through the plant, which is ultimately going to be your EC if you take a sap or tissue sample later in the season. Boron affects a lot of those things early on, but like you said, it has to be the right amount if you're doing it in furrow. I mean, I believe where we're at is like 0.05% on our starter fertilizers and things like that. Stuff that's definitely safe for a seed safe product, but it is going to trigger those little catalysts that are going to create better nitrogen turnover, better sugar flow, cell wall structure, cell division, multiplication, things like that inside the plant.
And that's one thing too that's worth noting as we jump into the exact amounts, and what we're running and when. I say exact, obviously, taking soil into consideration, but the in furrow is not as common on beans, right? It's getting more common on corn, but a lot of times it's about just early stage. So, and then placement of like, the more we can place that in the row, the more we place where we need. And if you're like, well, I don't have in furrow for my beans, I get it. That's totally fine. Then that first pass across your beans, we're wanting to run things like a trace amount of boron, like the zinc to push those processes, right? And so then if you're going, well, I don't have liquid for the beans, totally fine. We're going to build a program that matches your equipment, but also still does its best to maximize everything that we're doing to work for the system as a whole.
Yeah. And I will say just a tidbit here. One of the common things I use to get over that speed bump is streamer nozzles for bean applications, because it gets a little bit more precision when you're applying rather than a normal broadcast sprayer, which allows you to put it next to or on top of the row, which can help out a lot. Because like you said, I mean, with beans, guys aren't throwing liquid on the planter. That's not something a lot of guys are doing. Not doing in furrow or even 2x2. Definitely not doing side dress applications. And so you got to kind of get a little bit more creative with that. But you can implement normal field sprayers with certain tips to get to where you want to go. And like I said, and everything might not be perfect like that sheet we showed earlier where it had all 12 stages broken down and you need this. It may not be perfect, but the closer we can get to those times, the better it's going to end up for
right.
At the end of the day. And
this is another thing I want to. We're going to call our 5-minute break done and start on this here. So this is like the standard program, right? Standard being, common, but, there's a lot of change to it. But I want to talk through this, Andy, and everybody else on here, because to explain some of the reasons behind different things. So obviously the advanced cal or calcium, whether it's in the row, whether it's broadcast, whether it's lime, whether it's pelletized, that's your foundation, right? Yeah. That helps increase the soil's capacity for nutrient movement, for water movement, etc. We've talked about calcium in a webinar before and how important it is. That one was one where I was just like, it's important for everything. Yeah. But it really is the foundation.
Every cell right? That any living thing has on the planet.
And I'll give you the two most important things, right? The two most important things as far as base saturation goes is, one, the more magnesium you have in ratio to your calcium, the less hydration the soil can hold, the less oxygen the soil can hold. So as it starts to heat up and dry out, it dries faster, it dries tighter, it shrinks. So if you got high mag soils, you're already dealing with soybeans that don't like that, nodulation issues. Then when it gets hot and dry late, it kills yield, right?
Also locks your CEC up,
right?
As well,
right? And then it locks up your phosphorus, right? So when phosphorus ties to magnesium in the soil, or iron, or aluminum, it's very hard for the plant to use it. And so that's the foundation of going, hey, let's make sure the foundation of everything that we're doing is right. In our program, we use Advanced Cal. Advanced Cal is a fantastic tool. It's a lot of what has made us popular over the years. We have a ton of success with raising base saturation, with raising pH with that. This is a specific, targeted in the row, on the row, approach here. But whether it's broadcast, whether it's dry lime, whether it's pelletized. That idea there is get that pH right, get the base saturation most importantly right. Because if you're like, my pH is fine, but my crop's still struggling, check your magnesium and your calcium levels. And if your magnesium's over 20%, your calcium's under 60, well, you're going to have a hard time growing an 9 bushel bean. I'll tell you that.
And before we move on from the calcium section of this program, I just wanted to touch on something a little bit more in depth that Nathan talked about with your magnesium attaching to your phosphorus. And it kind of goes the same way when we were talking about the timing for certain nutrients with the boron and zinc in the tissue and how that helps transfer them into amino acids and protein. It's all about covalent bonds. Calcium releases and separates from that phosphorus a lot easier than magnesium does. Mm-hmm. So what that means is the plant and the soil can separate them and uptake that phosphorus a lot easier when it's connected to calcium than it can when it's connected to magnesium, which makes it a lot more available to the root, to those fibrous roots to intake for you. So that's a big part of the whole system when it comes to calcium and boron and all these different things. And with the photosynthesis process we were talking about earlier, is what is it attached to? How easy is that bond broken for the plant to be able to take up, separate, and take up separately to send to whatever part of the plant it needs to send to, or that part of the GDU.
Amen. So moving on from that base, because we could spend an hour talking about each of these points. I want to address this because this is something that is really cool. So carbon core is one of our humic sources. It's 24% humic, 5% fulvic. If you're using humic right now, or using carbon, foliar feeding cord in that V5 to V8 stage, are you concerned at all with affecting kernel development? Let's talk about that once I get down there. I'd love to talk about that because I got some great answers for you, Andy, and they're going to be varying as well. But before we get to that, the reason that there's carbon in here with your burn down pass is to increase, just like we use a surfactant to increase penetration and increase the ability for that herbicide to actually get in the plant to kill it. Yeah. Right. The more we can hold that on the tissue longer, the better. Right. So what we do is we use a small amount of humic and fulvic in there. The result is it ends up in the soil, which adds carbon to the soil, but it also increases the kill from our burn down, increases the efficiency of those chemicals, which is super helpful. But it is something that when we're building your program, it's important to talk about, hey, what are you using? What herbicides are you using? So that we make sure we want, if it should be added, and then it's added in the right amount. And I've seen that be extremely successful in helping with weed control, especially with eliminating third passes. When you're running your second pass of herbicide and having that cord in there as well. And that's why that's there in that small amount, is you'll notice certain things like boron is on here a bunch, right? Why? Because as Andy was, and as we kind of talked about, too much boron at once can be a problem. But if we kind of spoon feed it at the rates that we need based on the soil, based on the tissue, that's where we get the best results from it and the highest efficiency from it. Carbon pulse, the sugar that's on here, it says pricing pending, but we do have pricing, but that's highly dependent on the system that we're running. This is one of those things that it's very dependent on the soils as well.
And on the tissue sampling from the season before, I use a lot of that to drive my carbon pulse or sugar. Basically, it's a sugar product, 61% sugar, and a lot of that, for me, from my standpoint in agronomy, is focused off of your bricks and your EC for your sap and tissue sampling, because that sugar, the extra sugar, really helps feed that energy source for you a little bit later on in the growth season.
So that carbon core, once again, is in here, helping holding capacity, helping to feed beneficial bacteria in the rhizosphere. Zinc, we already went over why it's in there. 3H and 18. What you'll notice here, and what Andy noticed really quick, was that there was it's a split. Why is this split? And this just says 3H and 18 down here, but there's a lot of different tools that we can use other than that specific blend, depending on the year, depending on the crop, depending on the soil, as far as different analyses with and with different types of potassium, right? So one of our potassium acetate blends is like a 41710 -1, fantastic, for foliar feeding. But I like that split because really what we're trying to do is feed that plant enough early that we're pushing the roots to grow, giving it the phosphorus it needs for that, but then also not overloading the system. Because I've seen that happen where we're putting too much in furrow, and then all of a sudden the first tissue samples we take are phosphorus deficient, and it's like, why is this phosphorus deficient? Well, we're overloading it in the root zone. We need to pull some of that out and allow that plant a chance to breathe, really. Because an analogy I used with one farmer is like, hey, if you're super thirsty, water's great until I hold your head underwater. Okay. And that's what happens is those tillers close up because there's high concentrations of phosphorus, white acid orthophosphorus in that root zone. And it's going, oh, I can't take all of this in at once. It'd be too much. And it'll actually decrease the efficiency of it. So we want to target that rate in furrow to the soil, to the temperature of the soil when we're planting, right? Because there's also times where we're not running any ortho in furrow. It's hot soil. It's high available phosphorus soil. We're running things in furrow that are going to support the system, support mineralization.
Planting is a great explanation of that.
Yeah. Or if you're in the South, and it's just always nice and warm dirt when you're getting in. Once again, these rates that are on here, all of this shifts and change based off of yield goal, based off of soil, based off of all of the factors that you feed us and we take into account on your analysis, right? Because if we go back over, if I still have it pulled up now. If we, Sierra had that up. If we go back to those couple of those farm specific ones, and we will here in a second, but Sierra stepped out, you'll see that varies. And so when you see on here 40 gallons or 50 gallons, that is once again totally dependent on, well, what's our target, what's the efficiency factor of, historically with the ground, if it's a farm we've been working with, of how much nitrogen we need to make the bushels we need to make. Because you've got guys, we've got Brad up in Minnesota that's got a crazy high efficiency nitrogen, because he's got a ton of release from the ground. He's got a ton of efficiency in the plant with the support systems that we're running, all of this stuff to decrease that. Do you have different rate recs of 3H and 18 or anything else you put in furrow on different row spacings? Yes. The 15-inch, 20-inch populations, planting time, all of that should affect it.
Definitely.
All of that should affect it, and it does.
And that's what information you give us really matters.
I got excited. It does. It matters. Everything matters to building the program. And this is one of the things that, like, everybody always asks, like, hey, just send me your standard program. I'm like, yeah, that's finally I got to the point where I was like, hey, let's not be overly stubborn and let's build a standard program that I don't want anybody to just blanket run, because your row spacing matters. Your planting date matters. Your zip code matters. The moisture levels matter. All these things should vary. So Aaron, when you talk about row spacing, that affects more than even just the ortho side as far as how we're feeding it and how much we're feeding it. Populations matter to that as well. Next year's programs will start accounting for genetics. And this is the thing that's so important. It's like in West Texas, Ryan, a new agronomist here with us, brand spanking new, fresh behind the, green behind the ears, just graduated from college, and super smart guy. He was working on genetic development for drought resistant corn for West Texas. And basically they're increasing the cell count and decreasing the cell size. Right? Tighter hydration layer, easier to hold in moisture. That changes the ratios of all your nutrients that you need, right? Because of how we're building cells. All of this stuff matters, Aaron. And this is all stuff that we take into account to some extent. I still ask about genetics right now, simply to get a gauge on, hey, I know certain things might shift now, and build those into your program. Even now. Or not just the genetics, but your grow period, on what you're running as well. And all of these matter because, different genetics or different heights or different periods, or, all of this matters for how we feed it, when we feed it, et cetera. And part of what needs to be taken into account. So thank you for shouting that out. And so what you'll notice here is, once again, we got humic in here in the system. Why do we have humic in here again? It's to increase the nitrogen uptake. I actually want to jump over to another document real quick while we're talking about that. And I promise, Andy, we're going to talk about foliar feeding. I promise. New Max Micro. Yeah. Okay. So this is micronutrient enzyme amino additive for 32. You can't get this from us yet. Still in R&D. But essentially what this is a nitrogen additive that to increase nitrogen uptake and nitrogen efficiency. The reason, actually, no, this is the wrong document. So you get a little sneak peek there. That's not supposed to be in the zip file I'm sending to everybody. So there's a bunch of guys that are getting to see an R&D product. If you call me asking to buy this, bad news. It's not ready yet. It's going to be in R&D for at least another year or so. Phosphorus supply on carbon. What am I looking for here? So while I'm searching around the system here, it's Y drop utilization. So basically, it's that carbon impact, and there's studies showing that when you're running humic or you're running carbon with your 32 with your Y drop, right now meta-analysis shows a 23% increase in nitrogen uptake.
Yeah,
23%, 72 cents, 23% more effective. Okay, on a 200 bushel corn crop, just to make it super easy math, right? If I'm using 200 units to make 200 bushel, and I get a 23% increase in my 200 units, I already spent the money on the nitrogen, right? So I still got my 200 units out there. Yep. But now, based on meta-analysis, just that humic addition is making an extra 23%. Right, 23% there.
It's massive.
It's 250 bushel.
Yeah,
246.
Yeah.
246 bushel difference of $4 corn. Okay. That's 170, $175 ish difference an acre. Mm-hmm. Do that on 1,000 acres. That's $175,000 swing on a farm.
Yeah. A very small input price, and for a product that you can really add, with anything. And the big part about that is, for me, the way that I look at that scope is a lot of nitrogen is applied, calculated for loss. What are we going to lose from this nitrogen, right? We need 1 unit to create 1 bushel, but what are we going to lose out of that unit in order to make the final calculation of how much nitrogen we need to put down? And every little step that you do like this is just like with a surfactant or adjuvant for chem. It makes it that much more efficient, which on a bad year, say a bad, drought year, maybe it doesn't push you to 250, but it got you to 200 when you were going to be at 150 because of drought.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Or something of that nature. And
it's not just your Y drop, by the way, it's all your in passes. So your 2x2.
Yeah.
If you can get it in your 2x2 and you're using a humic source that you can run through your planter, that's a clean humic source, or any carbon source for that matter. The first 40 pounds of N actually shows a 45% increase in uptake having that out early. And it's not, why do you think that is? I got to make this more of a conversation. I keep rambling over here.
I would say it's due to just what we just talked about. It allows, allows it a holding space for,
right. It's exactly what you just said.
Synthetically increasing your CEC in your soil. It allows that nitrogen something to attach to and bond with, which is going to keep it around longer, first of all, and it's going to give it a launching pad for your plant to uptake.
Right. Yep. And going back to that goes back to why we're putting it in furrow, why I suggest running it with your nitrogen, why I suggest running carbon with your Y drop, nitrogen as well with your herbicide. It's one of those tools that the more we increase the efficiencies of the nitrogen, that's a huge lever. Of the phosphorus, potassium, whatever else we're putting in the root zone, that's a huge lever. Of the chemicals that we're using, man, if I can eliminate a $30 pass of chemicals, that's a huge level, especially if I can do it at a quart to the acre. What is carbon core, like $10 bucks?
I believe so.
a core at 250 and I can eliminate a $30 pass, that's a huge lever. And that same 250 is also able to get me 23% more efficiency out of my nitrogen. Huge lever.
Yeah.
Huge lever. And the great thing about it is we've got a great humic product with that, the 24% humic, 5% fulvic at a heck of a good price. But there's carbon sources everywhere right now. So use carbon in your system and in your program, because we definitely will, if you're working with us, to maximize everything that we're doing. And if you're trying to talk me into leaving it out of your program, and I'm the one billing it, or Tim in that case, if you're trying to talk him out of it, both of us are going to fight you on it, because they're like,
yeah, 100%.
you're cutting my legs out from under me. This is a key part of the program that makes everything work the way it needs to work. All right. Anything else you want to talk about on the carbon side before we jump over to the full air feeding?
No, not on the carbon side. No, I would like to mention, just like what you said, with this program that you guys are viewing in general, it's a great jumping off point. I love that we have it to send to people when they ask, hey, what's a typical program look like? But that's not what we're about here at Agritech. We're about, like I said, it's always been a case-by-case basis. We'll fit these things in where they fit into your current program if we're not rebuilding the whole thing. And based off of what your data is and what your equipment is, it's not just a, one-size-fits-all type of organization or, outfit here.
Right.
We definitely try to look, more on a case-by-case basis in everything we do.
Right. It's everything. And it's not just case-by-case from like farm to farm. It's field to field. It's year to year.
Yeah.
It's crop to crop. It's everything is a part of the equation, right? And that's why it's like we've been hounding, like, the more data you give me, the better job I can do. And that's part of the reason why, a lot of times people call me and they're like, well, I want you to, I don't have a soil sample, but give me an idea of what to run. And I'm like, get a soil sample.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not out. It's like taking your, this is the analogy I always use. Tim's probably tired of hearing it. It's like taking your truck into the mechanic and saying, well, something's wrong with it, but I don't want you to figure out what's wrong. Just throw some parts in it.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Okay. Yeah. And then when I don't fix it, you're going to be pissed to blame me. I got to have this diagnostic, man.
And that's why a lot of times when you send over some soil data to me specifically, if I don't, and everyone does this, you wait until right around, maybe a month or so before planting, before you decide which farm is going to be, unless you're doing a strictly rotational system, I might do beans here, I might do corn here. Well, if you send me that data and you don't know where it's going to be, you're going to get a 20-page readout that says this is what you need for corn, this is what you need for beans per each soil sample there,
Yeah.
Because,
or what I've started doing lately is marking which one's going to have the higher success potential in the field. Because a lot of times we get in this rotation of like a year on corn, a year on beans. And most of the time that's a great way to run it. But there are certain instances where it's like, no. This field's going to do a lot better as far as, more than anything financially for the farm. This particular piece of dirt's going to do a lot better with XYZ. There's a guy I talked to yesterday that called in with low calcium base saturation, wanted to talk about advanced cal. And I was like, all right, what's your base saturation? He's like, slowest I've seen is 13%. I was like, don't tell me you're going to plant beans in it. He goes, I'm going to plant beans in it. I was like, oh, man.
It's all that 11.
I was like, okay, well, we got our work cut out for us here, right? Or high mag soil beans don't like. So we either got to fix that or we're going to have more success elsewhere. So to jump to Andy's question about foliar feeding corn in the V5 and V8 stages, are you concerned at all with affecting kernel development? It's a great question. And I feel like what you're asking there, maybe you can clarify, Andy, is if you're asking about potassium sink and worried about creating a potassium sink. And what we're doing when we're foliar feeding is, first, if we're going to foliar feed phosphorus, potassium, calcium, zinc, any of that, right? It's going to be program dependent. Rates are going to be dependent. Tissue samples are going to help affect that. But no, I see much more success by having a split program with with your phosphorus, to go back to that point of efficiency of like, hey, what we're getting in the furrow is getting us the root development. If we're having low phosphorus during that early tissue development. We need to develop that energy supply. We need to get that foliage developed and that canopy developed. That's going to help push that. If we can use tools that the plant can take phosphorus in easily through the tissue to address that, especially if you're dealing with soil that's already having issues with phosphorus availability in the soil because of tie-ups or because of things that we're already fighting there. Bypassing the ground is always a great way to do that. And so that goes back to the point of like, hey, nothing on that sheet is going to be the exact same on every farm.
Yeah, amounts. Amounts is
yeah.
what it ultimately comes down to when you're trying to protect from things like what Andy is talking about. You have to have the right amounts and the right product that is the absorption rate is going to be there for you.
And so when you start seeing phosphorus deficiency early, or if it's like, hey, we're doing a split program, the reason we're doing that, and then also making sure that the plant has that potassium later to make sure that we're getting that kernel. Been talking too much today. Kernel development is because that foliar feeding of that phosphorus is gonna boost carbohydrate transfer. It's going to support your reproductive signaling, right? Which is very important for the kernel. It actually improves seed and kernel set by having that. And then it does enhance your sink strength, right? So by having that, we're actually helping ourselves more by having that as foliar feed to ensure we're getting the late season potassium need met and keeping that from being a ceiling versus only having it in the soil, only having it in furrow, right? It actually puts more control in our hands to push kernel development, to push reproduction later, to make sure that the needs are met at that point, especially if we're dealing with soils where we're already having a hard time getting it out. So with we've kind of been going back and forth between the corn and bean, which has been kind of fun, doing it that way versus just corn than just bean.
Yeah.
I do feel like we should talk a little bit about that topic that we kind of joked about for a minute, about like the differences, I guess you would say.
In corn and beans.
Yeah, in corn and bean, aside from obviously nitrogen application, but I'm talking about in controlling nodulation, nodule development, supply of nutrients that each one needs more, like manganese.
Yeah.
And molybdenum. Manganese, highly important in both at different stages, right?
Yeah, no, definitely.
To increase nitrogen efficiency and energy transfer. And then your other one, molybdenum, very beneficial in a soybean plant early to increase nodulation and nodule development. Obviously, not as beneficial early in a corn plant, very beneficial later on when that nitrogen is now being turned into usable grain, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of your differences, aside from like soil structure and what does better where, and the amount of nutrients that they use being slightly different per bushel, et cetera. The biggest things that I would say, as far as your micronutrients are going to be one that varies some between each crop as far as what's more important, what helps more, and when we use it. And then the other one that is going to be a huge factor with beans to control yield is that potassium foliar feeding, or getting that late season potassium need met.
Yeah.
And making sure that it's being met can have a huge impact. Because I said early on, I brought up about foliar feeding potassium driving a 20 bushel difference on a field. It has a huge impact on a soybean. It still has a really big impact on corn, right? And both financially pencil out to be a really strong decision when it's needed, but more noticeable in the bean than in the corn. Partially, I think, just because of how much the plant is able to store. You get a 6 or 8 foot tall plant, it's storing more. Sorry, go ahead.
It comes down to, as well as just simple, the shape of the plant. You know what I mean? The canopy, when it canopies and things of that nature. Like we said earlier, one of the biggest driving forces of energy in a plant is going to be the leaf, right? And so that comes into a large part of how you treat beans and corn differently, with the manganese part of that being a driving force for increasing leaf, I guess you could say, surface there. So yeah, there's quite a few differences, and I would say most of them shine in the form of micronutrients more than anything. Obviously, there's the obvious differences of nitrogen production from a legume standpoint versus a corn standpoint, and like Nathan said, your amount of phosphorus and potassium you need in the stalk versus in the actual fruiting body of the plant, the kernel or the pod, or the bean itself. But a lot of it comes down to, in my eyes, your micronutrient placements, when you need to do those things, and the amounts of when you need to do those things. Like one we talked about earlier, for example, is boron, directly being connected to the size of the nodule of that bean,
which is a big one, big one in beans, a huge one. And we're always putting on the corn because it pays in corn when you need it.
Yeah,
but it pays more in beans. They're very dependent on that because they're not as efficient pollinators.
Yeah, and another massive one, which we have, if you look at our corn program that we pulled up earlier, we have the in-row gallon to 2 gallon advanced cal, but a massive one for beans is calcium, soluble calcium. Beans and alfalfa take up way more calcium than corn does. Now that's used in the actual plant for cell multiplication, cell division and structure of the plant. Whereas in the corn plant, obviously every cell wall is made out of calcium, so it does use it as well. But we're using it there more so as nutrient efficiency, fertilizer efficiency, nitrogen stabilization, things of those nature. So how the plant utilizes these certain nutrients is a vast difference as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I know we've been, we're an hour 45 in. To everybody that is listening to this whole thing, appreciate it. Hopefully this is helpful. I want to jump over to a question Andy asked about 3H and 18 in furrow on beans. Absolutely. Anytime we can run in furrow on beans, especially up north, I've seen positive results.
That is one thing where they're similar. Yeah, corn and beans is that early phosphorus release is going to drive root architecture there, and that's what's going to get you down to those lower states. Even more so on beans because they have a much less prevalent driver root than your corns do, which is going to be the root that's getting you down through those if you have compacted soils, which is the way that the bean roots and the corn roots expand are quite a bit different. And so having that early phosphorus release creates way more bushy, fibrous roots on both sides of the field there for beans and corn. So yeah, it definitely is a great early season pop-up or starter program for beans as well. And that's the hard part, when you deal with producers is corn and beans. A lot of people treat beans kind of as the redheaded stepchild of the situation there, right? A lot of people will throw everything they have, the kitchen sink, at corn, and not pay as much attention to beans, just because, for one, you have a higher cap as far as bushel count, bushel cost and worth. For two,
much tighter break even.
The idea of rotational crop has driven into people's mind that I can count on my corn year for my bean production.
Why do you like beans better?
Why do I like beans better?
I know you do.
I mean, they're much more reactive to stimuli. In my opinion, beans are much more reactive to micronutrients. They're much more reactive to things like calcium, phosphorus uptake. Corn is a little bit more finicky, and it's in my opinion, it's less reactive to a lot of those smaller tweaks that you can do to affect the end process there.
Yeah, I would agree. I wouldn't say necessarily. I say like them better. But the little things do manipulate the yield more in beans, from my experience, than in corn, as far as a total dollars amount, right?
Yeah.
And because, an extra 10 bushel in beans right now at, I know it's $11, but let's call it 10. It's $100. Well, at $4 corn, it's a lot bigger difference, right? That's 25 bushel I got to make to have the same dollar value difference. And little things like potassium feeding or boron, they can have a much higher dollar value impact on the
Yeah,
operation.
your
Why I
input
like
costs.
to focus on those a lot.
Yeah, your input cost is going to be much greater to get that 100 bushels on corn, or 100 or 25 or 10 bushels on corn than it is for beans. That's just the the fact of the matter. It takes a lot more input to make that change there.
Yeah. I could go down harebrained rabbit trails as to some of the reasons why, but we set to be at 5 o'clock because I want to leave some time for any more questions. Like we got 10 minutes left. We go till 6.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't think we'll need all that time. I mean, we can if you guys want to go that long, but I know, we've been in here a while. So I want to talk about a couple things about working with us. So we talked earlier about like, hey, if you want us to build up these high level analysis and input recs, they don't have to be specific, to that program, right? If it's like, well, I'm using manure or chicken litter. In fact, the example we used was a chicken litter example of how to use different tools to support that, and then make sure that we've got a litter analysis or a manure analysis to understand what nutrients we're getting from that. There's so many different ways to farm. There's so many right ways to farm and great tools we can use if we have them at our fingertips. Those are part of when we're accounting for these things, building a program and building a plan is going, okay, what are you doing? And how do we build a system to support that? Or even just give you feedback to support that. Even just give you guidance on like, hey, change this, move that, right? Would a splitter be better on beans or just straight in furrow? Andy, I'm starting to feel like you're asking me which equipment to buy. But
What was the question?
would a splitter be better on beans or just in furrow?
In my opinion, if we're talking about the starter program at 318 we were referencing earlier, I think straight and furrow would be the way to go. That's the way I would choose.
For beans specifically, yeah. For corn, having the ability to set stuff off the row, some is going to be a big advantage, probably even more so than directly in furrow, so that we can get more on at that stage. But yeah, with the beans, being able to concentrate stuff right on the seed, under the seed, to me, I see the most benefit, especially because once again, with getting that phosphorus specifically, it's not moving. So then you're waiting for the roots to get to it and then take it in and use it. The quicker they can do that, the more impact we, especially in cold soils. That's where you see a huge benefit there. I think, we've talked a lot about inputs and tools.
I think one thing I would like to talk about, and I just sent you over kind of a short explanation that we can pull up and share.
Do you want me to screen share that?
Yeah, which is just the importance of sap and tissue sampling. I know we've talked about it a little bit, but I want to go a little bit more in depth.
That's the same direction I was headed in. It's like the process.
Yeah, I want to go a little bit more in depth on why those matters. Certain things you can keep an eye out for, when you're dealing with that. And where I want to start is more so just some basic, explanations on tissue and sap sampling, on what these things mean for you, right? So when we're talking about tissue sampling,
man, have you got any soil tests with EC on them yet?
Yeah,
those are the best.
So I've gotten.
Sorry, keep going. My bad. Rabbit
trail. But more so with tissue sampling and mid-season corrections, and one of the things I was talking about, which is more prevalent in wheat and corn rather than soybeans, but towards the bottom here is going to be your NO3 versus your NCE, right? And so is that screen sharing? Would you go down towards this section right here?
Yeah. What, NO3?
Yeah, NO3. Yeah. So your NO3 is going to be your nitrate. We talked about that earlier, right? That's what makes the plant green, right? And a lot of times I've had people call me throughout the season and say, hey, I'm having yellow spots in my field. I think I'm losing nitrogen. And I say, well, all right, let's take a tissue sample or a sap sample, and it comes back that they actually have high nitrate. But what they don't have is a good availability of zinc, one of those levers we're talking about. And Nathan briefly mentioned it earlier. When it comes to nitrogen, I view it as an energy source or a river, right? And in that river, you get a stream. And every time you have a deficiency in a thing like sulfur or zinc or boron or manganese, depending on the crop, that is a dam, a beaver dam. And every time that nitrogen has to make it over that beaver dam, that flow gets a little bit less and a little bit less and a little bit less. And by the time you get to the end source, which is your transfer to amino acids and protein, you have a trickle. So by removing those dams, i.e., zinc and things of that nature, you allow more nitrate to transfer over to your amino acids. And one of the things that really what you want to look for on let me see, where is it at? Practical, this one right here, on your nitrate specifically versus your NCE. So if you look at this, your NCE is basically your transfer rate, right? On this one, what I was aiming for was about 87% was a good transfer rate for this crop. Your NO3 is your nitrate. That's the base form of the nitrogen inside the crop itself. So if you have a good NCE above 87 or above 90%, and you have a medium level NO3 or nitrate, that means that's actually good. You have enough nitrogen in the plant, and it's transferring over to amino acids. It's transferring into protein, which is going to build those carbohydrates, which is going to get you your bushels and your kernels. But if you have a high nitrate and a low NCE, then obviously that nitrate isn't transferring over, and that's when it's time to look at those ROI levers. The zinc and things like that. And I've saved people sulfur. I've saved people a ton of money by telling them to take tissue samples, take sap samples, because instead of going and throwing out, another foliar feed of $60, $50, $60, $70 worth of nitrogen, let's go throw out $2.50 to $5 worth of zinc, or maybe $12 to $18 worth of sulfur. Get that nitrogen or nitrate in that plant to transfer over into those amino acids. And so that is, one of those things that is, highly important for me. When I'm building full programs for people, part of the dollar amount that I factor into it is, hey, if you're going to run a full program with me, I really almost require you to take tissue sampling throughout the season. I want to know what's happening. And what that does is it stops the problem before it arises. We have a tissue sampling schedule. We have a program here that we can send you when you work with us. It will tell you exactly how to do it for your crop. We want you to do it at this time of day, this long after a rain, or this long after you've applied a foliar product, this many leaves, and it will tell you step by step where we want you to take those. And it gives us those little triggers throughout the season on those micronutrients, on those foliar feed. And that's, one of the things that I really like about liquid products is you can spoon feed and you can manipulate in season a lot quicker because they have higher availability or solubility rates, which can save you. If it takes a week for something to break down and turn into a soluble form, that week you could be losing, like we talked about earlier, 23% nitrogen uptake or something of that. When with a liquid bore or liquid humic product, we throw that in there and we say, well, your nitrate's low. We need to get your nitrate efficiency up, along with adding some more nitrogen into the program. So we're going to throw in a pint of humic. That way we know that we're increasing your nitrogen uptake, right? Things like that is what makes this, the SAP reports and the soil or the tissue sampling so important. Another thing to focus on is your bricks level. Bricks.
Oh, stop sharing. Hang on. I'll pull that up. Keep going.
Oh, well, bricks is basically your supply. That's going to tell you your supply of the fuel, sugars for the plant, total dissolved solids in there. When that is low, that means that not just nitrate, because nitrate is a specific, part of that, right? That NO3 is a specific, this is nitrate. It's really important. Obviously, it's one of the main energy sources, but there are a lot of other ones, your sugars, your glucose, all those type of things that are going to continue to feed that process from that nitrate to turn over into amino acids. And so Brix, EC, NO3 and NCE are probably, in my opinion, some of the more important categories for your subcategories, right? Those are your main categories, and then your subcategories would be the things like, oh, you're specifically low in zinc, or you're specifically low in that, and you can see how a low zinc can affect a low bricks or a low EC level or a low NCE percentage, right? And that's kind of what I wanted to talk about on the soil or the tissue sampling and the sap sampling. Do you want to kind of?
Yeah, I mean, I think
that?
it's such a useful tool, and it's one of those that, with programs that I work with guys on, I'm like, hey, if cost is the problem, I'll pay for the sap analysis. I need to know what's going on because it affects everything about decisions in season. And one of the things that you get from us this year, if you're working with us, is a playbook. We mail it to you, and the playbook is, hey, here's when we're taking different types of samples, and those ensure more than anything that I'm not telling you to use something or to get something that you don't need. But most importantly, it's making sure that everything else that we are doing has the support system and the support mechanism, right? The entire basis of our program, the entire design behind it, is to be smart, right? Data makes us smarter. Data makes us more effective. It makes us sharper. That the more we can use that data and understand that data and take these things, and as a farmer, understand them, and also work with a company that is looking at those to understand everything that they possibly can before coming back and saying, here's what I think we should do, right? One of the things that I've come across so much in this industry, and I get it, but it's like, oh man, I did this and it worked great, so we should just do that for everybody, right? Yeah. And it's like, that's not agronomy, right? That's not sharp decision making. That's not what we want to be doing across the board, right? Because maybe it worked great for you because you have a specific situation in the soil or the program that you're running or the season that you're growing in, that it was a huge lever. But does that mean it's going to be that way across the board for everybody? Absolutely not. And that's one of the things that's tough is, when I talk to other people, that's like, well, this is what we do because it worked for it's worked really well for me on other farms. Okay, that's awesome. It's encouraging. Yeah. Why is the next question. And then why do I need to do that? Right. Yeah. And those are the biggest things that it's like, I feel like you need to be able to answer as somebody that's giving advice to a business that's making financial decisions, is the justification and the backing behind that, right? And it's not just, I think we should. I think this will work. I'm not a fan of that. It's
I do think that is one of the bigger disconnects that I see within the ag industry. I love the ag industry. I've been in it, most of my life. And even in the 10 years actually working in the ag industry, through the lens of an agronomist, I've noticed that it's improved greatly. But one of the things, Nathaniel's dad, Robert, he's been doing this, long time. And
ages,
ages. Just kidding. Almost a millennium.
Just kidding. Not trying to get
but one of the things that we talked about when I first started working here, and he's like, he's explaining to me, different inputs and things like that. And he said, when we just started, making suggestions for nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and I didn't. And he's like, well, it's around 1947. The war was starting to end, and we had a surplus of those things because that's what we made bombs out of. And since that time, if you go to school for agronomy, you'll notice that the textbooks haven't really changed that much since that time. Now, the disconnect is from the R&D, research and development section, which has had a massive uptick, the last 10, 15 years. There's so many webinars like this you can go to, or classes, and different types of soil DNA testing and all this cool stuff that we're pumping out to the retail section, to the producer. And that's where, and like I said, I understand the thought process. It worked well here. It's going to work well here. Also, I have a million clients. I'm a huge, massive corporation. So I don't have time to do this for every single client, or that input is just not justified for the means. But that is, if you look at any other industry, they have, involved over time. Cars got seat belts. Food had certain, regulations it had to meet. There's all these different industries, technology that have just keep increasing. And with farming, it's a generational thing, which I think is one part of it. I did it how my dad did it. He did it as his dad has done it. And also, like I said, it's one of those things where the retail doesn't necessarily support this level of detail, that we try to bring here at Agritech. And that is something, circling it back to the tissue sampling and the sap sampling, is I can build you a program for the beginning of the season, but what I can't do is tell you how much it's going to rain. I can't tell you what your genetic is going to do for that specific soil for that year. And so these are the audibles that we have to call mid-season, are these tissue samples. That's what tells us what our audible is.
And doing it in a way that it's not adding a bunch of extra passes, right?
Yeah.
Because it goes back to what I said at the beginning, is the idea here isn't to make a 8-pass system, right? It's to collect the data at a time where, hey, we're already about to be running across the crop with something else. Let's get data ahead of that so that we can make a decision then. Mm-hmm. Right. And be able to, and if it's like, hey, you're fixing to run fungicide late season, before you do that, we're going to pull a tissue sample. We're going to see, how the plant's doing. And if there's things that can be added into what we're already going to be driving across doing that are high ROI levers that we can pull, we want to know that.
Or it's maybe telling you, hey, you can apply this. I know guys that from tissue sampling and soil sampling that they've had a farm where they're traditionally making 4 chemical passes a year, which adds up, significantly. And if we can reduce that down to 2, that saves you, depending on what you're using, $15 to $60 for an acre, which is massive ROI. By implementing a few different, nutrients or chemicals here.
And that's what I love about the nutrient supply side of it, is it's like you're talking about like carbon and that, but even on, maybe I'm making an assumption, but on the other side of that is like, if you're making that many chemical passes, why is your canopy developing so slowly?
Yeah, exactly.
It should not. We should be able to get canopy to choke out, weeds faster than that. Mm-hmm. And row width obviously is an impact mechanism there. But if you're on 30-inch rows and you're having to make that third pass, one of the first things that I look at isn't just like, well, how do we make the chemical work better? It's, why is it? Yeah. Why are we not getting enough canopy early enough to help us not need that? Right. Mm-hmm. Is there something that's holding back plant that's decreasing how quickly that canopy develops, that now it's not just a matter of saving the money on the chemical pass, it's a matter of fixing a problem that might be holding back the yield aside from the weed pressure and the added expense there.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Right. And that's why, all of these things tell a story. Soil samples, tissue samples, they tell a direct story, but that's why it's little things like that, or test weights, or
protein percentages,
right? All of that tells a story of like, well, outputs equal inputs, and so you can look at the outputs, the things coming off of a farm, and be able to deduce so much about lack of efficiencies in the program or in the system or in the soil that we can use just from looking at little things like that.
I mean, the thing is you can make more money off of 1,000 acres with a full-blown in-depth program than you can with 3,000 acres, kind of half blown,
just trying
to throw stuff
out
the wall. And that's just as simple as it is. I mean, yeah, you might be making an extra pass on that 1,000 acres, or you might have to go out there and do a couple extra tissue sampling. But what's doing that on 1,000 acres versus 25 or 3,000 acres when you have to do all the other things over there? And I'm not saying that's what you should do. I'm just saying you multiply that process over everything you have, and it just efficiency is key. Like I said earlier, precision and timing beats everything else. It beats amounts, it beats everything else.
It does, yeah. I feel like it's worth talking a little bit about mineralization and feeding the soil as part of the process, right? Because we kind of touched on it. I feel like it's a topic that's becoming extremely well known, but it's definitely a part that we haven't totally figured out. We're continuing to identify beneficial bacteria, how to feed it, how to support it, how to build a system and an ecosystem that works for us. And that's one of the biggest things I tell a lot of guys. It's like, hey, what your soil is a living organism, just as much as the crop that grows on top.
Yep.
And if you're feeding that living organism so that it then feeds the crop, you're always going to be more effective. And so, we talked a lot about enzymes and amino acids in the plant. There's a lot out there right now on R&D side, or just on new products or new stuff coming to market. And things that we've used for ages in like our plus blends or bioact of enzymes and aminos to increase mineralization, microbial populations. And it's super cool because we've got rhizocatalysts and phyllocatalysts that trying to add to the bag for this year that are enzyme and amino acid stacks with direct enzymes to mineralize certain things, right?
Yeah.
Directly focused on phosphorus, directly focused on potassium, so that we're not just feeding the system, which that helps to feed it, but then also saying, hey, I'm going to take the tools that the plant and that the bacteria use to break down soil mineral and get what they need out of it and run those in the system too. And that's one of the things that I feel like really is the make or break on whether a liquid system actually works for you, is how much are you feeding the soil versus just trying to go, okay, I was on a, full dry program. I need to do just the equivalent pounds in a liquid. That's not how this works, right? One of the biggest problems that we have is, going back to your point, is we've looked at agronomy through the lens of chemistry for decades.
Mm-hmm.
The problem with that is it's a living system, right?
Yeah.
And chemistry is only part of the equation when it comes to biological systems. And those efficiencies, those other, factors, cofactors, lead to conversations like I had today with the lady that's like, man, I've been putting DAP and potash and lime like crazy on this ground, and it's getting worse and worse. What the heck?
Yeah.
And you look at it and you're like, yeah, deader than dirt, right?
And that was something that I was going to mention earlier. Is
Yeah.
I myself personally, I'm more worried about when you talked about how much phosphorus and potassium and percentage wise and dry matter is in the soil. I'm more worried about depleting my microbial activity than I am my P and K. Much more worried about that. Everything we add, not everything, but a lot of things we add are caustic materials that directly negatively affect those things, and so you have to add those other things that are going to positively impact them. And there's two sides of that coin. Obviously you have your prebiotics and your postbiotics. Some things are meant to feed the system of your natural your natural microbial activity, and some things are meant to introduce a new microbe that's going to help push like you said, a certain target, a certain nutrient, a phosphorus, potassium, and nitrogen, something of that sort. And so there's a lot that goes into that, and kind of the same thing as we were talking about earlier with the exodus of the root system. If you throw in a lot of phosphorus early on, it's going to shut down and say, all right, that's enough of that. Well, that same thing happens in the soil, and Nathan knows this is one of my favorite subjects of the rhizome. There's certain plants out there, just to kind of put it on the table how they work, that can signal for nutrients a quarter mile away from each other. You know how impressive that is in the soil, and when you take that, and that's not how it works for your average corn and bean, but that is how it works. Not that that distance, but that is how it works. They signal, say, hey, we
calcium
need
wavelengths.
Yeah, we need this over here.
Human resonance, baby.
And the more you kill that, the less efficient that soil is going to be for you, and the less efficient that commercial fertilizer you add is going to be.
Yeah, anything.
Yeah,
right. Anything, because at that point, it doesn't matter as it matters much less the form that you're putting it on, whether dry, liquid, or the compound that it's in, and more so what ability you're giving the soil to use that and to feed it and to move it and to signal for it. And yeah, that's, oh man, I love studying calcium wavelength signaling. And I did not know the quarter mile thing. That is wild.
So
that is wild. But sorry, keep going.
no, it's a fungi type of plant, but I mean, and they have much more interconnected
Mycelium.
connections than your regular plants do. But the overall idea of it works the same with corn and beans. In one similar area. They're all signaling each other.
Did you read Mycelium Running?
I did.
Yeah, that's a good book.
And, but they're all working together to signal and say, hey, we need more of this over here. We need more of that over here. And that's where you see some of those live enzyme products that are the kind where I'm talking about, where you're introducing a new enzyme to create something out of that soil. That's what they're doing at the end of the day, is they're turning off that signal and saying, hey, no matter what you're reading in the soil, we want you to keep producing this one thing. And that's,
right.
That's how they're modifying those things to come out with the thing that targets potassium or targets phosphorus or targets nitrogen. It's saying, hey, there's no shut off switch for you now.
Right.
And that's what they're doing.
Yeah.
And those are really impressive products. And the more, we advance those type of products, the easier it's going to be to work with less commercial inputs or topside inputs and work with more of what the soil has to offer for us naturally.
Amen. Man, obviously it's a topic that we could talk about for ages. What I want to get into just a little bit before we open up for questions is our offering, as far as we've talked about service offering, right? The building the programs, building out not just, hey, here's what you should run, but a management system, a process for the farm, building it out in a way that's super easy to use by making all of your protocols, your mixing and spraying protocols, how to add, what to do, what not to do. A big one when you're mixing chemicals together, all of that to support your program specifically, all custom built for each farm. Excel, sheet that breaks all this down as far as each pass, what we're running. It's that level. And then also, so that's the service side of what we want to bring to the table with every farm we work with. Aside from the service side, it's the material side, right? So one thing that I always tell people is like, hey, no, I'm not. I'm just going to run through a bunch of this. But one thing that, I'd tell a lot of people is like, I'm not a salesman. I'm a problem solver. And that's not a shtick. I totally mean it. It's like, I don't want you to buy something you don't need. I don't want you to get something that isn't going to be, the most cost effective, right? If I can't solve the problem, I'll help you figure out where to get it. Or if I can't be the most cost effective solution for it, then I'll help you figure out where to get it, right? And that's what I take a lot of pride in what our team has done here, as far as always adding tools to the bag, right? The bag is always growing. And so, the custom blend side that we talked about earlier is great for nutrient, and nutrient feeding, but I kind of want to run through a little bit, and we could send you out this year's product catalog with everything. It's really, really upgraded catalog in terms of just like a price sheet more than, sorry, I'm not hating on your catalogs here. Your catalogs are dope. I mean, just as like a straight price sheet in terms of like just the sheer amount of like products that we have in it. And so I'm just going to run through some of these so you can these are just pre-made, like the stuff we already have, not the custom stuff, right? Because then it gets endless. But 10, 0, 10, 10, 13, 13, 10, 20, 10, 3, 18, 18, obviously, 3, 18, 18-1, my new favorite.
Sulfur, is that one?
Yeah. 525, 624, 6-1, becoming more and more popular. 918-9-1, 924-3, dipotassium phosphate, that's a 0-21-26. Then we have a dipotassium phosphate, that's a 0-20-20. Diammonium phosphate, which is a 10-28-0. That's pretty cool. I want to learn more about. I don't use that one very much. I want to learn more about that.
As well,
really, really interesting. But that's a diammonium phosphate.
It's pretty close to like 1034.
Yeah, it's a lot cheaper,
yeah.
source, little higher salt. But very, very interesting tool to have in your bag when you need it, or when you got the right tools to use it. Of course, the calcium products, Advanced Cal. If you ever been curious about what's the difference between Pro Cal and Advanced Cal, both of them are calcium chelates. We use an enzyme-based chelation in those, and then the Advanced Cal just has an added micronutrient pack, enzyme and amino acid pack to that, and then added fulvic or humic, right?
Yeah,
or
humic.
Both.
Yeah.
So that really, between the two, Advanced Cal is the way to go, in my opinion.
Again,
even though it's
a
a little bit more per gallon, yeah, it's just feeding so much more. To get better results out of it, especially in heavy soils. Started out as like, oh, if you got sandy ground, use this one. If you got good ground, use that one. And then we started realizing, oh man,
it
works better no matter where you put it. It's better. Not to just get rid of the Pro Cal at this point. And then on the calcium front, calcium acetate, very, very good for foliar feeding. Calcium, really good for a small amount in furrow use. That's a really great tool to have in the tool bag for soil surfactants, aerate being our primary soil loosener. Then on the potassium front, this is where I get excited. We got the 0030 potassium carbonate, right? You've got 10-18-4-1. That's a potassium acetate with sulfur. Awesome foliar feed. 10-18-4-1. Sorry, 10-18-4-1. Made that. That's a potassium lactate.
Yeah.
Oh man, my new favorite tool.
Yeah, I like it a lot as well.
Because the highest uptake out of all the potassium foliar feed sources. Okay, that by itself is great, especially because it's like it's very, very similar cost to potassium carbonate, potassium acetate, but getting, I think it's 4 times the uptake of potassium into the plant, or uptake efficiency, for almost the same price. It's almost a no-brainer, but it's extremely beneficial for bacteria.
Yeah.
So you're talking about all these things that, you got to be conscious of. Is it helping or hurting the system? Right? And then are we using things along with it that are going to counteract any negative, right? Like NO3 or NH3 usage. Yeah. Nothing against gas, but you got to use things in the system to build that soil back, right? But then like with the potassium lactate, man, that one's fun. And it's also neutral pH, which means it's super easy to use with drones, super easy to use with your spray rigs. It's not corrosive because potassium carbonate can be highly caustic, highly corrosive on aluminum, like drones, found that out. So that one's really cool. And a blend I was talking about today with Bill, if he's still on here, is taking the 10-18-4-1 potassium lactate. And actually, no, that's not the one we're going to take. We're going to take where's the other potassium lactate? The 0022 potassium lactate, and mix that with AMS 35.
Yeah, which gives it even more penetration power.
Not just more penetration power, but potassium and sulfur both through the tissue at the same time. Bill's got his program really well done, and now it's finding ways to be more efficient, more cost effective. That's one of the ones that we were talking about today.
Which I don't know if we'll get down there, but just a quick thing: that AMS 35% liquid is.
Oh, we'll get down there.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, it is great. I'm excited for that one. To pick up where I left off, because I was talking about the lactate. So there's 10-18-4. Not a lot of potassium in that, right? So I wanted to jump to the 0022 and 29 because we do have more direct sources.
Lactate base, just a higher potassium.
But if you're needing phosphorus and a small amount of potassium, that 18-4 is great. 413-17-1 potassium acetate. By the way, we'll send this updated book out to anybody and everybody that wants it, so that way you can look through it yourself. And it's actually got a little guide sheet for each product in here of like how it's used, how much is normally used, when it's used the best, what rates to run, whether it's in furrow, foliar, et cetera, just for general, general amount, right? But for specifics, obviously, you're going to work with your agronomist here to, okay, let's look at, the program, the system, the tissues, the soils, what's going on to determine what's going to be most effective there. But potassium acetate 0029, and then potassium carbonate 0030, both of those almost the same price, but you get a much higher uptake out of the potassium acetate. So that's the way a lot of people are going now. And then the potassium lactate with a 0022, carbonate with a 0032. And then, with the nitrogens, got the ATS and ATS plus, which are great. But, and then, 25 triazone, which is great slow release, as well as 25 00 plus, which has your micros and everything added to it, that INUE, uptake factor already in there with the micronutrient side. Same with Nitromax, already having that INUE in there. But then the AMS 35, which you were excited about. So why don't you talk about AMS 35?
Yeah, I mean, with the AMS 35, it's a chilled out version, I guess you could say, in a way of your ATS. It's a lower sulfur uptake, but it's one of those products that you can use multiple times throughout the year without having to worry about stuff being too hot, especially on foliar feeding. It actually works as a penetrator, a sticker, so you can run that. Another one of those things you can run with your chemical passes. That's going to improve the efficiency of your chemical pass while also getting some sulfur into the mix as well for you. And so that's one of those things. And most people are used to the dry version of it. That's the way that I've always known it. And so with this, it's I was pretty excited once we started carrying this, because, like I said, it's one of those things where you can add multiple times a year, and those little touches like we've been talking about with zinc and boron and all those things, and you're getting a little bit of sulfur every time. And so what I tell guys is I usually, for main crop removal rates, I'll run my ATS or whatever my sulfur version is a little bit up front, that 70-30 split, on corn, let's say 30 up front, 70 with the nitrogen, with the side dress. And then when we're doing those late season tissue samples, and it's time to hit it with a little bit more sulfur, whatever the reason may be, maybe some got leached out, it's too dry, it's too wet, whatever the case may be, that's when I come in and start hitting with the ATS or AMS, is when those later season where it's a little less hot, we don't have to worry about plant stress and burn and things like that. And we can get in that sulfur where we need it. And that's what I like the most about it, for sure. Yeah.
And then carbon and biology, this is what makes it all work, right? Got BioAct, which is fantastic part of the program. With micro-packed feed biology, enzyme and amino acid packed feed biology, lot of it's getting late in the day, byproducts of seaweed, kelp, soybean, to feed a lot of really beneficial enzymes and aminos in there and elements into that product that has a very high ROI at the quart use rate. Average right now across the last 10 years is like 7 bushel bean, 12 bushel corn out of $10 worth of.
If we're looking at a purely
it's amazing.
ROI version of it, I'd say it's probably like a 5.5 ROI,
right,
your input for the product versus what you're going to get out of it. So that's a great one. It goes along with a lot of these carbon products, great ROI products for sure.
Carbon core is the 24% humic, 5% fulvic. So that obviously really great carbon source, really well-made humic that stays in suspension really well. It's a humulite, so it's a lighter, easier to use, easier to keep in suspension. Still, not only a really good amount of carbon, but also a really good amount of fulvic to feed bacteria, to feed the rhizosphere. Carbon pulse, which is a dextrose sugar, which dextrose is of all the studies done, both by like Beck's and elsewhere, dextrose outperformed other sugar types by leaps and bounds, nearly doubling the performance on the next closest. So really great sugar source there. And then we've got 12% humic, 8% humic, 6% humic. Really, for me, I'm like, man, take the 24 and water it
Yeah.
down, you know, pay
Yeah,
less
and
for
especially
logistics.
because it's a green light, and like, that's what most people's, in my opinion, when dealing with producers, most of the time their drawback on humic is it's kind of hard, heavy to work with, you know, like, and that
Right.
cuts out a lot of that. And especially like you said, you can take the 24, water it down to 12, cut it in half, and it's even lighter for you. You know what I
Right.
mean? It's even easier to work with. So
Yeah. And then organic kelp, great, you know, asset, great tool, especially for feeding the system. Seaweed extract is in there. Fish fertilizer, that's what I was looking for, is fish fertilizer, which now looking at other sourcing for that for next year as well. Not just like the fish, but other types that are similar to that. Really great, especially if you're organic. A great solution there. I've got a cotton grower that's organic cotton and feeds his whole program with fish fertilizer, kelp extract. We use carbon, sugar. I mean, it's like full blown biology driven. It's badass. And he killed it. He does better than anybody around him. It's great. Micronutrients, Borolift, which is your 10% boron MEA, magnesium EDTA, manganese EDTA, Mintech, zinc. Mintech's a blend, zinc EDTA. And then we've got multiple blends and additions to other packs that have your copper, cobalt, your zinc, which no, zinc's on there. Sorry, not zinc. What's the one I'm looking for?
molybdenum,
nickel, all these different little bitty things where a lot of times what we're doing with those is, you know, you can get them by themselves, but those are usually going into mixed blends. Man, there's so much stuff on here. It's nuts. Yield Maker, one of our great new products that was developed by your team here, did amazing in trials. Really performed great on corn, beans, wheat, hay. But man, the best performance personally that I saw was out of beans, and all the replicated trials averaged 7.9 bushel advantage over control groups, and almost doubled any other enzyme and amino acid pack that we were using.
It's like slapping a nitrous tank on that bioact product.
Yeah,
you know, it's what it's like.
It's great stuff.
And we got a great price point for it. You know, just for that to be said, it's you know, one of the cheaper inputs as far as those type of products are going.
Mm-hmm. I'm not going to go into all the different surfactants, but you know, SureTech being a great one that is on the list to be using. AMS is probably my go-to, you know, just to get the extra sulfur. And there's even more than that, but there's a lot of tools in the belt, and our team's done a really great job at making sure that we are able to be extremely price competitive on all of our tools, on all of our inputs, so that we're not only bringing the solutions and the answers to the problems and the processes to use them, but also the tools to use them that are going to be the most cost-effective way to get them and get them straight to the farm.
It's been a great couple of years for us, last couple of years with that.
Yeah, a lot of development there. Definitely, you know, want to send this out to anybody that wants to look through the catalog this year of what's all in there, or the programs, you know, standard programs, the justification sheets, which are your kind of science dives, your masterclass deep dives on these, all that stuff. Definitely, you know, reach out. We want to work with you. We want to answer your questions. We want to fix your problems, you know, that ones that you're trying to find solutions to, being able to help, ones that you might not even know are there, being able to help identify them and fix them. That's what we're here for. And so on that note, with the last little bit of this, to those of you that remain after this long 3 hours, if there's any questions you have about products, about getting material, about working with somebody, about anything other than the State of the Union address, because I was working on soil samples till 11:30 and forgot it was happening. So don't ask about that, but everything else, I'm here to answer. I'm here to answer. Tim's here to answer. Feel free to ask questions now or reach out to us personally. We'll move over to the chat here. Do all of your products mix together well? Absolutely not. Not a chance. So here's the basics of it. cations are positively charged molecules. Anions are negatively charged molecules. When you put cations and anions together, they like to stick to each other. And when they do that in the soil, like calcium and phosphorus, it's great.
Mhm.
When they do that in your spray tank, you're not going to be too happy.
Yeah.
And so, no. And we actually, with every program we build, we'll send out, those mix sheets so that you know what to and what not to mix. And not even just our stuff, right? On the chemical front as well, of like, hey, I want to run stuff in with the chemical. What can I run? And some of it is also, does it mix? Sure. Should you mix it? No. Right. There's certain things that can actually become antagonists, right? So like if you're mixing certain things with your chemicals, it should only decrease the effectiveness of your herbicide. Or decrease the effectiveness
pH of the product plays a large part of a lot of those things.
EC, sorry, go ahead.
Most of when we're saying that, so most of the biologicals, they can mix with anything. Most of your triple blend starters can mix with most other things. But where you start to get into, problems is like, when the products have that pH level difference, the calcium and the carbonate based products and things like that, is where you got to start paying attention to a lot of that.
Yeah, there's still the chemistry aspect. And we don't want to turn your farm into a mad science experiment. So, and definitely don't want you to have to clean out clogged lines and plugged up tips and all that. And that's why, we make sure to put together those mixing guides and do's and don'ts. And actually just last night I had one of our dealer agronomists reach out and he's like, hey, I need a sheet that says everything I can and can't mix with this.
Well, you already got it.
I was like, I got you. And sent that over to him last night, because it's in both of our best interests that you don't mix stuff together that doesn't, because the one thing that we're trying to do with every farm is make you more operationally efficient and more financially strong. And the worst thing that we could do is mix together a whole tank full of stuff, and then not only cost you time, but cost you money in lost product, cost you money in pumps that are seized, all that kind of stuff. And so, yeah, if you're not sure whether something mixes, heck, if you're not sure something mixes and it's not even our stuff, call somebody here. We are more than happy to help and tell you, yeah, do or no, don't. Because that, I feel like, is something that is always such a huge question mark on a farm, is like, well, can I mix this? Definitely a jar test is a quick way to find out. But even if a jar test succeeds, it doesn't always mean you should. Right? Because
those are visual representations. We don't know what's happening with the effectiveness of the product, from those visual representations. Exactly. We know it's not going to clog your sprayer up, but like you said, are certain things making other things less effective? And so most companies should have, some type of compatibility sheets for you. But when you're dealing with us specifically, you will have a compatibility sheet. When you're dealing with us, you have a personal agronomist, which you can call at any time and say, hey, I have another product that I'm adding, not from you guys. Can I mix this up? And if we don't know the answer, we'll figure out the answer and say, hey, don't do anything until I get back to you. We'll figure out the answer and let you know.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. But great question, Derek, because it's definitely a good one to address there. Definitely a good one. I started working on a book of like do's and don'ts. So like take the product catalog and then take each product and like, what can you mix it with? What can you not? And I was like, this thing's gonna be that thick. Nobody ever gonna open it up. They're just gonna call me. So I was like, I'm done. I'm not even gonna do it now. Should I? Probably. What we do instead is work with every farm to say, okay, what's everything you're using, and we'll make your mixing and spraying and application protocols for the full year. And that obviously changes if we're adding things in. Hey, let me update that. Let me make sure that your protocols are updated. And then when we're making recommendations, it's with the mindset of, hey, we're putting this in with that. So we're making sure that when we're building that protocol, it's things that jive well in the tank. Anybody else have any questions? Now's the time to shout them out. Happy to answer anything that you guys got before I run home to see my two little girls. And once again, I just so grateful for everybody that joins in on these. Um, it's truly an honor to get to hang out and talk in this environment, but especially getting out and being on the farms. This time of year is my time to get out and actually go see people.
Yeah.
Be out again week after next, running around farm to farm. And man, I learn more doing that than I ever do sitting behind a textbook.
100%.
It's nuts the amount that you can learn just by talking, just by asking questions. That's one thing that I was telling Gavin yesterday. I was like, just ask questions, man. Just ask tons of questions. The more questions you ask, that more effective you could be at helping somebody, because the more you know, right?
Yeah. It's very true. I actually saw, whether, no matter how you feel about the guy or whatever, but I saw a funny interview that a YouTuber was going about 5 years ago going to interview Elon Musk about his rockets. And he asked him a question about the outside shield of his rockets. And as Elon was explaining it to him, he was like, well, actually, you're right. And it ended up saving his company like $40 billion on manufacturing, just from that guy, random guy. He was a YouTuber that was into that stuff. But, just by him asking, like, what material are you using? Are you using the same material for this as you are for that? And he started explaining why he wasn't. And then he was like, well, that makes sense. We should be doing that. It made it all lighter. Saved him a bunch of money. And so yeah, it was a big deal. So yeah, asking questions, talking about stuff is massive.
The day we think we've got it all figured out is a bad day.
Yeah, for sure.
So one of my favorite things to say, Andrew said soybeans applying via fertigation. So that's another thing that, like, when you're working with us, it's not just in furrow 2x2, wide drop, knife, strip till, it's every method. And so we do a bunch. Matter of fact, Johnny, one of our agronomists here, is working with like 50,000 acres worth of cotton on setting everything up on the programs to go through fertigation, go through the pivots, to make not everything, but a lot of their nutrient application, to go through the pivot system to decrease the amount of passes they're making, and then just the little things. So what I will say to that is this: the cannabis industry is extremely efficient at feeding everything through fertigation. Extremely efficient. The difference is they got a drip right on the root. When we're putting on an inch of water, running something like a micronutrient through that, we're going to,
you're getting a lot of flow.
A ton of flow, and not a lot of residual sitting on the tissue. And so concentration, parts per million in that water, whether it's in the sprayer, whether it's in a drone, or whether it's through fertigation, is going to impact how well something works. And so there's a lot of stuff we can run through fertigation, or through a pivot, depending on the type of irrigation, that you're running. And we do it, and we put together the programs to do it. Heck, I've got a deer hanging on the wall from a farm that I went out to help set up their bleed systems 8 years ago, something like that. And so, yeah, all about setting that up. But I will just tell you that, like, not everything should go through the pivot, because there's some things, especially your little stuff, that you're not going to get what you want. Same as, it just, that part makes sense. I don't feel like that. You're not going to run your herbicide through the pivot for that very reason. Like, well, we need tissue contact, right? If I want to try one product on low CEC and low P&K sand, what would you apply? If I was to do one thing, no, you answer. I'm going to see what you say first.
It'd be a tie for me between
a tie.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, you said one.
Carbon core.
You got to pick one.
Carbon core would probably be the product that I would run on low CEC, low or sandy soils, just because another things that humic offers is it holds like 5 times its weight in water and nutrients, so it helps out with water retention and nutrient retention. It basically gives you more holding capacity and synthetically increases that CEC in your soil. So a carbon-based product like we carry here, the Carbon Core, that would be the one. There are many things.
That's a diabolical question.
Yeah, there are many
things. That is a diabolical question right
but
there.
If I had to pick one, just the top of my head, that would be the one.
I don't disagree, and that's the one I was going to say too. But it's tough to answer that one, because it's kind of like asking, like, if you had to eat one food for the rest of your life, what would it be?
Yeah.
like, well, I guess steak,
I mean,
but I'd still probably get tired of it after 5 days.
It's kind of like soybeans as well. Sandy soil, it's a double-edged sword. It's one of those things where it's way easier to change the meter in the soil. It's way easier to affect something with a small amount of product, but it also has less potential at the end of the day, because you can only grow so much, you can only hold so many nutrients.
Yeah.
And that's when you start to get into, foliar feeding versus ground application and things like that. But yeah, if I was going to put something in the ground on sandy soil, if I had to pick one, it'd be a humic, that carbon core product.
Yeah, I would agree there, just because it's a structural improvement, it's a biological improvement.
Yeah.
It's a uptake improvement. It's a redox improvement. Like, there's so many beneficial factors there. But I met a guy 2-3 years ago, just came by the office at random and was just like, hey, I want to know about, XYZ. And we started talking, and this guy for 20 years has been taking humic, prebiotic, and calcium and running it on ground, just those 3 things, and running it on ground. And he's like, I can take any piece of dirt and turn it into beautiful, black, gorgeous dirt. He's like, you can give me a piece of ground that's hard as rock, won't even grow a weed. And within 2 to 3 years, it'll be beautiful, beautiful soil, lush green fields. He's like, I can grow hay so thick, you jump off the horse's back and land on it. It's like landing on a mattress. And a lot of people might listen to that guy and be like, okay, this guy's crazy.
Yeah.
I was like, I totally believe you, man. I've seen it with my own eyes. Soil conversion is a real thing. Carbon is and carbon inputs are more and more every day, right? I get a little update every day on news in the ag industry and scientific developments. Carbon and using carbon inputs is like the most predominant thing right now that we're realizing more and more just how much of an impact. So I guess I'd have to agree, with Tim on that. But it is kind of a loaded question of like, man, there's not a one tool for everything, right? Unfortunately. But if there was one tool that I had to use in that situation, really in a lot of situations, it would probably be something that supports the soil, the plant, and the bio.
Secondary would be foliar feeding products. That would be secondary.
Bypassing the soil.
Bypass the soil and get a high absorption, like those lactates we were talking about and things like that earlier, something that has a really high absorption rate. And that would probably be a secondary thing, I would say. Yield maker, live enzymes, anything to support biomass, that's going to be huge. So.
Yeah, it's if we could take something like yield maker or rhizocatalyst and pre-mix it with humic, that would be the one. Also, the problem is if you pre-mix those, it'll start growing mushrooms.
Yeah. Also,
because it's so much like building blocks of life in one solution that any spore out of the air that touches it immediately starts turning into.
Also,
growth.
A 20-80 split on nitrogen and sulfur on any type of sandy soil is another thing I recommend.
Yeah,
just leaches
spoon feed it as much as you can.
Feed,
and that carbon with that nitrogen is going to be the most key there.
Yeah,
the most key there. Because if you got low CEC, you're already barely able to hold any nutrients, especially your nitrogen. So if you're running nitrogen, that would be the addition for sure. Sure. That was fun. That was a fun question. All right. Anybody else got anything before we wrap it up for the day? Look at that. We're finishing early. Can you believe it?
First. It's because I'm here.
That's because I'm sitting here going, Tim's got a 3-hour drive home after this. All right, y'all, we're going to wrap it up. I appreciate everybody that was part of this today, both the ones that are here, the ones that'll watch this later. Hopefully this answered I know it still left some questions unanswered, and that's because a lot of the questions that you might want answered are going to be most effective answered with you as far as what to use, how much to use, how much it costs. We want to maximize all of that for every farm, right? And so knowing where you are is one of the factors that is going to determine everything, right? From logistics costs of getting it there, from, capacity of having tanks to put it in, from the equipment that you're running, from the soil that you're growing in, and the moisture coming out of the sky, and when it comes. All of this stuff plays a part. And so it goes back to the beginning of this conversation of like, hey, Give us a chance. Give us a shot.
Phrase of the day,
we'll
case by
prove it
case
to you.
basis. You know, that's what
Yeah.
we're dealing with here always.
Exactly. All right, y'all. Be good.